A very good morning. It's 6 o'clock on today's show. The Pope's body will be moved to St Peter's Basilica this morning, where it will lie in state ahead of Saturday's funeral.
Plus, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy pulls out of talks on how to end the war in Ukraine that he was due to host in London this morning.
It's Wednesday, the 23rd of April. Your headlines. The body of Pope Francis will be taken to St Peter's Basilica this morning, where he'll lie in an open coffin. Tens of thousands of pilgrims are expected to visit the Vatican to see the Pope lying in state. Also ahead, top diplomats, including the Foreign Secretary David Lammy, pull out of talks in London on how to end the war in Ukraine. The Chancellor is in Washington to push for a trade deal with the US after the IMF slashes the UK's growth forecast. And in the sport, Manchester City put on a late show to beat Aston Villa and move into the Premier League's top three. A very good morning to you. The body of Pope Francis will be moved to St Peter's Basilica this morning to lie in state in an open coffin until his funeral on Saturday morning. Tens of thousands of people are expected to travel to the Vatican over the next 3 days to pay their respects to the pontiff who died on Easter Monday at the age of 88. Let's take a closer look now at what to expect over the next few days. Well, unlike previous pontiffs, Pope Francis chose to live at the Casa Santa Marta rather than move to the papal apartment. His body has been placed in an open casket in the adjoining Santa Marta Chapel. This morning, his coffin will be transferred to St Peter's Basilica. The Pope's body will lie in state for 3 days before his funeral on Saturday morning. Barbara Serra has visited the church where the Pope will be buried in a simple tomb with the inscription of his name in Latin, Franciscus.
For a pope who broke with tradition so often in life, it's perhaps not surprising that Pope Francis has chosen to do so in death. Most of his predecessors, most popes, are buried in the crypt underneath St. Peter's Basilica. But Pope Francis wanted to be buried here. This is the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, one of his favorite churches, and crucially outside of the Vatican. Now, why did the Pope want to be buried here? Well, he was very devoted to the Virgin Mary, and this church is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. He would often come here to pray, sometimes before big international trips, but sometimes just on his own. And the last time he came here was the eve of Palm Sunday, just 9 days before he died. It's not unprecedented for popes to be buried here. 7 popes have been buried in this basilica. The last one was Clement IX back in 1669. But just because it's not unprecedented doesn't mean it's not going to throw up some logistical issues. The funeral is going to be in St. Peter's Square. When that is over, the body will have to go from St. Peter's Square to here. Now, obviously, it's a 20-minute drive. There's going to be road closures. There's going to be a procession, something akin to a state funeral. But once the body is here, then this will effectively become a place of pilgrimage, a place of veneration. If you look over there, there is a queue, and you see a similar queue every day to get into this basilica. But when Pope Francis will be buried here, once this is his final resting place, that queue will be much bigger. Many more people will come here, and that is going to bring up issues with security and crowd flow for this basilica.
And we're going to continue to keep you updated on all of the developments coming from the Vatican, both today and the days ahead. And, of course, today, as we mentioned, the Pope's body will be moved to St Peter's Basilica live at around 8 a.m. We will have that coverage for you from Rome, live with Anna Botting and Barbara Serra. And, of course, our commentator, Alistair Bruce, throughout the morning, as mentioned, expected to be live UK time at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the Vatican. Now, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has pulled out of talks on how to end the war in Ukraine that he was due to host in London this morning. Mari's here with more detail on this. And it's interesting, I was looking through the papers, and this was the talks happening, yes, being hosted by David Lammy. We were a front-page story on The Guardian, but overnight, things have broken down.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was at the lobby briefing with the Prime Minister's spokesman just yesterday, they were talking about logistics and the kind of pictures that broadcasters are going to be able to get. So this has been quite a last-minute change. So David Lammy, he was supposed to be hosting his counterparts from the US, Ukraine, France and Germany here in London about how to end the war in Ukraine. We were expecting perhaps Secretary of State for the US, Marco Rubio. He then pulled out late last night. Then David Lammy pulled out. Then the French and Germans pulled out. So it kind of slowly collapsed over the course of the evening. And now there is some level of talk still going ahead. So Special Envoy for the US, Keith Kellogg, he's going to be meeting with French and German officials instead, but nonetheless it's not on the same level, as it were, so the kind of delegations have been downgraded. And also Sky News understands that Ukrainian Foreign Minister is already going to be in London and he's going to still hold a bilateral meeting with our Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. Then we had some tweets come out late last night, I think it was even after midnight, from Foreign Secretary David Lammy, where he said that he had a phone call with Marco Rubio in the US. He said it was a productive call. He said the UK is working with the US, Ukraine and Europe for peace and to put an end to Putin's illegal invasions. Talks continue at pace and officials will meet in London tomorrow. And then also Marco Rubio, he also did a similar tweet and said, today I had a productive conversation with UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy. I extended my gratitude for hosting the US delegation led by Special Presidential Envoy Kellogg. Our team is looking forward to substantive and good technical meetings with Ukrainian and UK counterparts. And then he goes on to talk about how he's looking forward to ongoing discussions in London at a future time. So those tweets, you know, both of those do kind of big beast, political big beast. We're talking about how those talks were productive. But nonetheless, the fact that these talks have collapsed to an extent, I think, is indicative of the difficulty at the moment between the relationship of the US and perhaps Ukraine. The context of this is the Trump administration has been pushing for an agreement on a ceasefire. Now, we understand that there was a US proposal to see essentially Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea recognised, and Zelensky rejected that yesterday. There's also reporting in the newspapers this morning that there is potential drawing up of the kind of new battle lines, as it were. I think we might be able to see it on our screens now, where there's reporting that Putin has agreed to kind of draw that ceasefire at those borderlines, and also that the US is proposing that as well. But for now, it all seems like it's slightly fallen apart.
Just want to spring you forward to PMQs as well, because, you know, yesterday, a strong speech from Kemi Badenoch to Bridget Phillipson, I guess, was her counterpart yesterday. Obviously, today the stakes are higher. This is perhaps the most important PMQs to date for Kemi Badenoch. She's got a lot to work with, and the Prime Minister's going to be on the defensive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for Kemi Badenoch, because she has, to an extent, had form on gender ideology, self-ID and women's rights issues for quite some time, because she was Women and Equalities Minister when she was in government, she does have a decent amount of ammunition, as it were, politically speaking, to try and attack the Labour Party on some of their stance on single-sex spaces. The difficulty will be for Kemi Badenoch that obviously some of the examples of issues that have been raised did happen under a Conservative government, and therefore Keir Starmer's defence will always be that, hold on a second, this was happening under your government and now I'm fixing your mess. The difficulty with that argument is he's not really fixing the mess. Arguably, it's the Supreme Court that is making actual changes.
And rhetoric on this issue, I think, matters to voters more than just what was done in government or in opposition. And we're going to talk to Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, about this and many other things at 7:15, so do stay tuned for that, Murray. Thanks so much. Now, the Chancellor has arrived in Washington for talks with her US counterpart at the International Monetary Fund's spring gathering. Rachel Reeves is under pressure to secure a trade deal, a mission more urgent now that the UK's growth forecast has been downgraded. Our business and economics correspondent Gurpreet Narwan has this report for us.
Spring in DC. And a rude awakening for the world's finance ministers and central bankers gathered here at the IMF to hear its latest verdict on global growth. Back in the autumn, everyone was wondering if Donald Trump could take the election. The seasons have changed. Now they're wondering how much damage he could do. The verdict from the IMF's economists is sobering.
Now, while global growth remains well above recession levels, all regions are negatively impacted this year and next. Tensions will greatly impact global trade.
High up on the list, the obvious victims, like the US, China and Mexico. But the UK too, which had its growth forecast slashed by a third. You've downgraded the UK's growth forecasts quite sharply and given a range of explanations, from higher tariff barriers to more domestic issues like cost of living pressures. Out of those, so the global challenges versus the domestic challenges, which one is weighing more heavily on the UK's growth forecasts?
In terms of the 0.5 percentage point downward revision that we're seeing for the UK, the domestic factors are probably the biggest ones. And in particular, there is a lower carryover from weaker growth in the second half of last year. There is also some tightening of financial conditions as interest rates have risen.
So the economists here at the IMF have just given their take, and it was an important reminder that the UK actually has other things to worry about beyond tariffs. Yes, they're unleashing turmoil on the global economy, but in Britain, it's actually things like rising energy bills that have the potential to cause more damage. A reminder that economies already have existing issues to deal with. In the US, recent high economic growth may insulate businesses from a full-blown recession. But inflation is an old problem, and it's about to get a lot worse. And never is that more obvious than at lunchtime. So we're in Eastern Market in Capitol Hill. It's just celebrated its 150th birthday. And while 2 centuries ago, much of the stuff here would have been grown in America, if we look around now, a lot of the stuff's actually imported. We've got some dates over there that definitely weren't grown in America. We've got dried pasta from Italy, Parma ham from Spain, and over there, some cheddar from the UK. US customers have global tastes, and some of them will begrudgingly pay the price for the stuff they value.
For this one, last week, the lady, he always ordering for me, he told me she's go up.
At Canali's Deli, customers know nothing compares to the Spanish cured meats. Rosemary, who runs the business with her son, has already had to put up prices in recent years. She doesn't know how much more customers will absorb. Are you worried about the impact this is going to have on your business?
How the people want to pay, maybe in this month, in 2 months, 3 months, I don't know.
But in that time, businesses might put off decisions or stall investment. For the global economy, it's not just tariffs, but the uncertainty that can kill you too.
And Gurpreet has more on what the Chancellor's hoping to achieve at those talks in Washington.
Rachel Reeves is arriving here in Washington for what will be a pivotal few days at the International Monetary Fund's spring meetings. She will have had a lot to think about on the plane over here because she's facing headwinds from multiple directions. The fund has already sharply downgraded the UK's growth prospects. And while tariffs have a role to play in that, it's actually homegrown and more familiar problems that will cause the most damage to the UK economy, like rising energy bills. And it's worth keeping that in mind as the Chancellor prepares to meet her US counterpart, Scott Bessent, over the coming few days. She's trying to negotiate a reduction in tariffs from the Americans, but even if she gets it, it's not going to be the silver bullet, the magic bullet that solves our economic problems. But while she's here in Washington, she's going to be making the case for open and free trade at a time when the world's largest economy is turning against it. Undoubtedly, she will be trying to find some common ground with Mr. Bessent. Perhaps there will be references to the government's takeover of British Steel, underscoring possibly the importance of making some things at home. But while she's here, her mantra will be open and free trade, a message not just to the Americans, but also to her G7 and G20 allies with whom she is also meeting. And finding common ground with them has never been more important.
More from Gurpreet throughout the day from the IMF meetings in Washington. Now, at least 26 tourists have been killed by gunmen in Indian-controlled Kashmir. Dozens of others were injured in the attack, which police blamed on militants fighting Indian rule. Nuclear-armed rivals India and Pakistan each administer part of Kashmir, and there are regular skirmishes along the border. The incident in Falagam and the targeting of tourists would signify a major escalation in the regional conflict. Sky's Neville Lazarus has this report.
A terror attack shattered the peace and tranquility of Kashmir. Families were enjoying their holidays in an off-road meadow in Pahalgam, known as Mini Switzerland, when militants opened fire, killing many and injuring dozens. The injured were taken to hospitals. Many were in a state of shock and distress. Security forces were rushed to the site of the attack and have laid cordons checking vehicles. Military helicopters were conducting sorties, scanning the area. Scores of tourists have left the area for safety.
We will now go back to Srinagar. We'd come to Pahalgam for a visit. Because of the terrorist attack, we will go back. We were stuck here for 4 hours.
Prime Minister Modi cut short his visit to Saudi Arabia. In a statement on X, he paid homage to those who lost their lives and said, "Those behind these heinous acts will be brought to justice. They will not be spared. The evil agenda will never succeed. Our resolve to fight terrorism is unshakable, and it will get even stronger." In a statement on Truth Social, President Trump said the United States stands strong with India against terrorism. We pray for the soul of those lost and for the recovery of the injured. Prime Minister Modi and the incredible people of India have our full support and deepest sympathies. Our hearts are with you. His Deputy Vice President J.D. Vance is on a 4-day official trip to India and had earlier met with Prime Minister Modi. This is one of the worst terror attacks in recent times. Tourists have largely been spared by militants. In 2019, an attack by a vehicle-borne suicide bomber on a military convoy killed 40 paramilitary soldiers. India blamed Pakistan for giving shelter to Islamist terrorists and conducted limited airstrikes across the border. A tense standoff between two nuclear-armed countries have lasted since. Both countries administer part of Kashmir and claim the territory in the entirety. But it's ordinary people that pay the highest price of conflict. Neville Lazarus, Sky News, Delhi.
Well, in the last few minutes, we have actually just seen pictures of the US Vice President J.D. Vance and his family outside the Taj Mahal. Of course, Vice President Vance is on a 4-day visit to the country, and earlier he met with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who said he welcomed the progress that's been made in negotiations for a trade deal between the two countries. These pictures coming in just moments ago there of the Vice President J.D. Vance. Now, police officers in England and Wales who fail background checks will automatically get the sack under new rules coming into force next month. Sandy is here to explain a bit more about what exactly these rules are and what the changes.
Well, police officers can, of course, be sacked. They're not above the law. But recently, some high-profile legal challenges have come to light, which show how difficult, time-consuming and also costly it is to sack officers who have their vetting removed. And so 2 years ago, the Metropolitan Police launched a new review which looked into this. And it was called Operation Assure, and it was looking at officers specifically those who are alleged to have committed sexually violent crimes. It was put into place to try and clean up the Met after a number of serious scandals. Some officers were removed, some had their vetting clearance removed, and some officers were sacked even though those allegations weren't proven. So can you see what a difficult legal situation that is, both for the courts and also for the police? Because in some circumstances, officers who failed the vetting process couldn't be sacked and remained in the force on full pay. And there was a high-profile case in February around this. And at the time, we discovered that 29 Metropolitan Police officers and staff remained on paid leave, even though they'd had their vetting removed. And at that time, the Met Commissioner called it a ridiculous waste of time. And the Home Secretary said that these kind of things showed how damaging it is to public trust. So today, measures are set to be introduced in Parliament, which will make it a legal requirement for officers and staff to pass vetting procedures, which means from next month, police chiefs will be given new powers to be able to sack people who don't pass.
What are the police view? I mean, we're going to be talking about this with Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, at 7:15. But what is Sir Mark Rowley and other police leaders saying about it?
So police leaders back this. For a long time, they've been asking for more powers when it comes to removing officers who fail these vetting checks. Previously, Sir Mark Rowley had said it is absurd that officers who are not fit to hold vetting cannot be lawfully sacked. In a statement today, he says it was never right that an officer could lose their vetting but not lose their job. These reforms close that glaring gap in the law and will allow us to move swiftly to remove those who have no place in policing. This matters not just for the public we serve, but for the vast majority of hard-working officers who should be able to feel safe, have full trust in those they work alongside, and have the confidence of the public. So that's all kicking off in Parliament today, and expect the reformed police dismissal procedures to come into place on the 14th of May.
Sadie, great stuff. Thanks so much. And a reminder again, 7:15, we'll be talking to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. All right, let's have a look at the weather now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The next couple of days will bring showers or more prolonged rain, but there'll be dry and brighter spells too. Earlier rain over central and southeast England will clear shortly to leave just a few showery outbreaks. The rest of southern Britain and Ireland will have a mostly dry morning, if rather cloudy, but southwest England will see a few showers. Elsewhere, there'll be sunny spells and a scattering of showers, but the Northern Isles look grey and drizzly. It'll be cooler than yesterday in the east, warmer in the west. That's your weather.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, Sky News takes a trip to China's Silicon Valley and meets the tech entrepreneurs enthusiastic for the future.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The only way to Gaza for us right now is with the Israeli military. The IDF had brought us in to show us a tunnel network under a residential neighbourhood.
The length of time it must have to have created these tunnels must have taken years.
At the end of the day, it's war at the top. It's war down here.
I'm Alistair Bunkle, Sky's Middle East correspondent based here in Jerusalem. As we were filming, there was a gun battle in the next street.
This neighbourhood, the Israeli military say, was the stronghold of Hamas's Rafah brigade.
It was just after 6:30 a.m. when the first shots were fired.
I remember everything. It was a day that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget.
There's no moon, perfect conditions for smugglers and human traffickers trying to move fuel, weapons and people.
The valleys in between, they're some of the main smuggling routes.
After days of negotiation, a major smuggler here has agreed to meet us.
The families that we've spoken to of people who have died trying to cross into Europe, they say you're a murderer. Are you a murderer?
No.
Sky News, get the full story first. Begum was 15 when she left East London with 2 school friends to join Islamic State in Syria.
Do you feel that you have committed a crime to the extent that you should serve time in a British prison?
I mean, I feel like the only crime I committed was coming here.
If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. I can take the heat. The second thing that Harry Truman said, was in politics, if you want a friend, get a dog.
My children will love a dog.
In Tel Aviv, a constant streak of interceptions filled the night sky as waves of missiles came in.
It appears to be a very, very large and sustained attack on Israel.
Welcome back. Hangzhou is one of the most historic cities in China, but it's also known as the country's Silicon Valley. Tech startups like DeepSeek have already taken on Western competition. When it comes to the global trade war, it looks like businesses aren't too worried. Our Asia correspondent, Helen Ann Smith, has been there to find out more.
The city of Hangzhou is coming into view. and the world is paying attention. This is China's Silicon Valley, confident, ascendant, and charting its own path to a high-tech future.
Competition's a good thing.
That is a good thing. Yeah.
In hubs like this, entrepreneurs brim with enthusiasm. For their businesses, yes, but for China and its tech scene too.
We have the talents, we have the environment, we have the full supply chain. Even though we have a challenging environment, yeah, it's our time.
Yeah.
It's our time.
It's our time.
But that's exciting. Yes, of course. Yes, and I think it's our time to show and battle with other foreign countries. So I think it's our time.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And do you think it's also your time not just to have that competition with other countries, but to win it as well, to win that competition?
Of course.
I guess hopefully to set some standard, set some record.
Yes.
Right.
Chinese people actually love technology.
Zhang Jie has been mentoring and investing in Hangzhou tech startups for some 20 years. More young people are approaching her now than ever before. She believes this city, this country, have unique advantages.
In China, we have more than 10 million university and college student graduation. Then we're talking about at least 5 to 6 million of engineers with college education background, right? So with such large group of young and intelligent people, with a good environment, a favorable environment for the entrepreneurship, I'm sure there will be even greater company came in the future.
Right now in China, tech leaders are in vogue. Photo ops and handshakes, an abrupt change from the crackdown they faced just a few years ago. And there's one name they're particularly proud of here, even though there's no name on the building. DeepSeek, the startup that stunned the world. What DeepSeek created here, an AI model as good as Western alternatives for a fraction of the price, has been genuinely game-changing. Not just in terms of AI advancement, but also in terms of how this industry is viewed. For China, it's inspirational innovation and proof that tech could be the backbone of the future economy. But for others, like America, it's viewed as a threat. Indeed, Donald Trump is ramping up restrictions. This is the boss of America's leading chip firm, NVIDIA, rushing to Beijing to shore up business. They are well aware here of the cut in ties to the US, but most believe they can cope.
Microscopic scanning equipment.
Dr. Song Ning invited us back to his laboratory. These microscopes will pair with AI to massively speed up medical diagnostics. For them, the pursuit of American customers is on pause.
I do not think by limiting the scientific and technological progress of China or other countries, Trump will be able to achieve his goal. I think it's a false premise. Information is so developed now. Each country has very smart people. It will only force us to have more tech innovation.
The trade war will still leave a hole in China's economy. Tech firms, however advanced, can't yet fill that gap. But the innovation here is rapid, and it will leave its mark on the world. Helen Ann Smith, Sky News in Hangzhou.
We're going to take a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, can Rachel Reeves secure a trade deal with the United States? We'll have more on the challenges she faces in Washington this week. That's next.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The only way to Gaza for us right now is with the Israeli military. The IDF had brought us in to show us a tunnel network under a residential neighbourhood.
The length of time it must have to have created these tunnels must have taken years.
At the end of the day, it's war at the top. It's war down here.
I'm Alistair Bunkle, Sky's Middle East correspondent based here in Jerusalem.
As we were filming, there was a gun battle in the next street.
This neighbourhood, the Israeli military say, was the stronghold of Hamas's Rafah brigade.
It was just after 6:30 a.m. when the first shots were fired.
I remember everything. It was a day that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget.
There's no moon, perfect conditions for smugglers and human traffickers trying to move fuel, weapons and people.
The valleys in between, they're some of the main smuggling routes.
After days of negotiation, a major smuggler here has agreed to meet us.
The families that we've spoken to are people who have died trying to cross into Europe. They say you're a murderer. Are you a murderer?
No.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Begum was 15 when she left East London with 2 school friends to join Islamic State in Syria.
Do you feel that you have committed a crime to the extent that you should serve time in a British prison?
I mean, I feel like the only crime I committed was coming here.
If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. I can take the heat. The second thing that Harry Truman said, was in politics, if you want a friend, get a dog.
My children will love a dog.
In Tel Aviv, a constant streak of interceptions filled the night sky as waves of missiles came in.
It appears to be a very, very large and sustained attack on Israel.
Welcome back to the Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, we'll take a look at today's papers in the news review and we'll bring you the latest sport. But first, a reminder of all of the day's top stories this morning. The body of Pope Francis will be moved to St Peter's Basilica this morning to lie in state in an open coffin until his funeral on Saturday morning. Huge crowds are expected to flock to the Vatican to pay their respects in the days ahead. The Foreign Secretary David Lammy has pulled out of talks on how to end the war in Ukraine that he was due to host in London this morning. He was expected to meet his counterparts from Kiev and the EU to discuss what a ceasefire might look like. The Chancellor has pledged to defend Britain's interests as she prepares to meet fellow finance ministers in Washington to push for a trade deal with the US. Rachel Reeves will spend 3 days there for the International Monetary Fund's spring gathering. And police officers in England and Wales who fail background checks will automatically be sacked under new rules that come into force next month. The Home Secretary says she hopes the changes will restore confidence in policing, and she'll join us at 7:15. Right, let's get more now on the death of Pope Francis. Some in the Catholic Church fear his successor could take the Church in a different direction. The Pope was known for his liberal outlook and welcomed individuals and groups into the Church who previously may have been shunned. Sky's Lisa Holland has this report for us from Vatican City.
The pilgrims come now to the seat of power of the Catholic Church at a time of transition. Life goes on in the hustle and bustle of St Peter's Square. So too does the business of the Church. The meeting of Rome's cardinals, just the start of shaping the next chapter of Catholicism.
The College of Cardinals has to decide whether or not they want to continue on the path of reform initiated by Pope Francis, of making the Church more open to the modern world, to being more inclusive of all of its members, or to dial the clock back and to go back to a Church that's more interested in sort of leading with doctrine first and what the Church is against rather than what it's for.
It's a special time to be at the Vatican. Those buying souvenirs give a sense of the Church's massive reach. With many new Catholics coming from the Southern Hemisphere queuing to get in, there's no shortage of people wanting to connect with the Church. The decisions being made here at the Vatican in the coming days will influence the growing and changing Catholic Church around the world. But what do Catholics want from their next Pope?
We hope that the new Pope will continue the openness of the Church and, accomplish whatever he probably started.
What direction would you like the Church to go in?
To move with the times. I think there's still a lot that we need to grow and be more inclusive as a church, yeah. So that's the direction that I'm hoping.
Are you confident the cardinals will elect someone who will do that?
That's a tough one. I hope they do, though. I hope they do.
Some in the Church believe the foundations have been laid to continue in the spirit of Pope Francis.
Nowadays, Pope Francois had been having many cardinals coming from all around the world. So I think the cardinals are much more representative of Catholic Church because they come from all the world around.
You're from Mexico. Yeah. What do Mexican people want from the next Pope?
Yeah, that
closeness, that openness, that testimony of faith. Yeah.
And do you think the cardinals will deliver what the people want or what they want?
The same.
For others, it's too soon to consider a future without Francis. Sister Anugrah Minj from India works at the Vatican translating the Pope's messages into Hindi. She's just come from viewing the Pope's open casket.
Looks like he's sleeping. He's sleeping.
That obviously must have been a very emotional experience for you.
Yes, many were in tears. I was also in tears. I cried. I could not control myself because I have seen him many times.
What sort of Pope would you like to see next?
That I don't know. We cannot say.
From the Philippines to South Korea and across South America, Catholics around the world are in mourning and waiting to see what this transition will mean for them. Lisa Holland, Sky News, Vatican City.
Well, it's shaping up to be a challenging few days for the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who will be joining other finance ministers and central bankers from around the world in Washington today for the International Monetary Fund's spring gathering. Let's speak to former United States Assistant Trade Representative and the former Chief of Staff of the President's Council of Economic Advisers, Harry Broadman, who very kindly stayed up for us in Washington. Harry, very good morning to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
I guess the first question is a broad one. It comes back to an old phrase over here for the last decade. But where do you think the UK is in the queue, in the line, in the President and the Treasury Secretary's perspective of who to do deals with first?
Well, I think it's a natural partnership, actually. The demands, if you will, in quotes, by the US of the UK and trade are pretty well known, whether it's access to the national healthcare system, whether it's easing up on US exports of certain foods and relief from sort of a technology tax. If I were in her shoes, what I would propose, if she's able to and has the backing to do so, tell Trump that the UK and the US will partner up and press China for reforms. I think that would mean a lot to Trump. He's handling this personally. The Treasury Secretary, the Commerce Secretary, they're all in the back seat. And I think it would be, a pretty brilliant strike for her to say, listen, let's do this together. I'm on your side.
Is the focus really just Chinese reforms for President Trump? I mean, it's seemed wildly more widespread than that.
Well, I think that is the core. I mean, don't forget his metric, and it's fanciful, as an economist to say this, but his metric is deficits, trade deficits. They're economically meaningless, but that's what he's fixated on. And to try to convince him otherwise, I think, is a losing battle. And that's why I say, teaming up with the US and the UK to take on China, to drive down deficits between the countries, and to open up their trading system. I think that, that would be a unique proposition, I think, for the UK at this juncture. I don't know of any other country at this point who is as close to the US as the UK who's tabled that kind of proposal.
Mm. I guess the question is, what really can the UK achieve by challenging China directly? And would it be sensible to do so when we're fairly isolated at the moment? To come back to your point about trade deficits, of course, the US doesn't have one with the UK. And as you point out, there's few countries as close as the UK are to the US. So again, it just brings us back to the point of it feels like, what else are we meant to do to abolish the tariffs we face? I guess it brings me around to a broad question. Is the expectation now in the DC community that the 10% tariffs will remain in place and it's only the extra ones on top that countries are able to fight to have removed?
I mean, I'll take Trump at his word on that. Of course, one can take Trump at his word and he'll change his mind. But I think that has been the constant in his refrain. And it's true, the trade balance between the U.S. and the U.K. is fine, but what he's looking for is relief and a fellow traveler vis-a-vis the Chinese. And then I think he would look kindly to the UK to, do a deal between the UK and the US. But his issue numero uno for him is China. Whether that's reasonable or not, in some sense, is besides the point. That's the ticket of admission.
I mean, it brings back an interesting question, the extent to which you fear long-term lasting damage is done to the US reputation, such that we're even having this conversation as to whether it's sensible or not for the UK to burn ties with China in the hope of tighter ties to the US. That would be a no-brainer 5-10 years ago. But there's a genuine concern that might be the wrong long-term strategic choice.
Well, I think, listen, Trump's not going to be around forever. And I think the Chinese understand the game that's being played. And, they're pretty cunning as well. I spent a lot of time on the ground in China. I know that economy almost as well as I know the U.S. economy. They also understand the dynamic that Rachel Reeves is playing into with Trump. They're not idiots. And I think, they would understand the deal that she would like to swing with the U.S., bearing in mind that, there are bigger fish to fry on both sides of the Atlantic and the Pacific with China.
Final question, Harry. What's your view on the US economy from here? Do you think there will be a recession or not?
I think the odds are higher that there'll be a recession than there won't be if policy making is as idiosyncratic as it is under Trump. That is what, as we know, is spooky markets. It's the downward draft in policy to a lower quality economic policy, but it's the uncertainty. It's this up and down, and that is instantly reverberating into markets.
Harry Broadman, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And much more from the IMF gathering where Rachel Reeves is from Gurpreet Narwan throughout the day here on Sky News. But for now, we're going to have a look at the sport.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
I'm sorry, I just have a German passport. Hopefully I can convince them and show them and prove them that I'm proud to be the English manager.
For only the third time in history, the FA have turned to a foreign manager to take charge of the men's England team. Thomas Tuchel follows in the footsteps of Sven-Göran Eriksson.
If we don't do results, of course, they will try to hang me, but even if I was an Englishman, they hang me. So that's...
And Fabio Capello.
A winner with a capital W. That was the template. This is the man.
When the news about Tuchel broke, there was a mixed media reaction. Some in Tuchel see a Champions League winning manager and the best candidate available if you want to win a World Cup. That's certainly how the FA bosses view it. But for others, there's a more fundamental principle here. They believe that an Englishman should be in charge of England.
Well, I was hoping we'd get an English manager, but when you look at the choices, there are very few, aren't they?
The jobs are so prestigious and there's so much money in the job that people are tempted to spread the net wide.
There's nothing in the water that stops it. It's all about opportunity. I think it's probably a little bit simplistic just to put it down to national borders.
On whichever side of the debate you fall, there is one fact which is indisputable. The pool of English coaches at the elite level of the game is pretty shallow. And the key question is, why?
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Right, from the sport to the weather.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The next couple of days will bring showers or more prolonged rain, but there'll be dry and brighter spells as well. Early rain over central and southern eastern England will clear shortly to leave just a few showery outbreaks. The rest of southern Britain and Ireland will have a mostly dry morning, if rather cloudy, but southwest England will see a few showers. Elsewhere, there'll be sunny spells and a scattering of showers, but the Northern Isles look grey and drizzly. It'll be cooler than yesterday in the east, warmer in the west. Ireland and southern Britain should brighten this afternoon, but there'll be further showers around later on.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
So to come on The Breakfast Show, we'll have a look at the papers in our news review. Mari's back with that.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The only way into Gaza for us right now is with the Israeli military. The IDF had brought us in to show us a tunnel network under a residential neighbourhood.
The length of time it must have took to have created these tunnels must have taken years.
At the end of the day, it's war at the top. It's war down here.
I'm Alistair Bunkle, Sky's Middle East correspondent based here in Jerusalem. As we were filming, there was a gun battle in the next street.
This neighbourhood, the Israeli military say, was the stronghold of Hamas's Rafah brigade.
It was just after 6:30 a.m. when the first shots were fired.
I remember everything. It was a day that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget.
There's no moon, perfect conditions for smugglers and human traffickers trying to move fuel, weapons and people.
The valleys in between, they're some of the main smuggling routes.
After days of negotiation, a major smuggler here has agreed to meet us.
The families that we've spoken to are people who have died trying to cross into Europe. They say you're a murderer. Are you a murderer? No.
Sky News, get the full story first. Begum was 15 when she left East London with 2 school friends to join Islamic State in Syria.
Do you feel that you have committed a crime to the extent that you should serve time in a British prison?
I mean, I feel like the only crime I committed was coming here.
If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. I can take the heat. The second thing that Harry Truman said, was in politics, if you want a friend, get a dog.
My children will love a dog.
In Tel Aviv, a constant streak of interceptions filled the night sky as waves of missiles came in.
It appears to be a very, very large and sustained attack on Israel.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Well, welcome back. Time for the news review. Mari's here for that. Let's go with the first story, which is Daily Telegraph. Mari, you've gone for Trump to let Putin keep seized land. We were talking about this earlier. It relates to these talks as well that's broken down.
Exactly that. Now, I mean, there is a huge amount of information in this article, and we're not going to get to it all, but I'm just going to give people a flavour. So the Telegraph is reporting that there is a proposed peace settlement from the US, and it's a 7-point plan. And they go through all 7 points as to what they've been briefed is on the cards, as it were, to end the war in Ukraine. And so the first 2 points cover an immediate ceasefire, direct talks between Russia and Ukraine. And then step 3 requires Ukraine to refrain from seeking NATO membership, something we know that is in direct contrast with what Keir Starmer said over the past months and years around kind of being on an irreversible path to NATO membership for Ukraine. Then the 4th point here is about territory. So recognising Russian sovereignty over Crimea, which the Telegraph is arguing would violate a central principle of international law. So after the Second World War, lots of Western allies signed up to essentially a rule where no country can forcibly annex sovereign territory of another. And if it does happen, then we would all not recognise that territory. So that would directly contravene that agreement. And then also talking of essentially drawing up the battle lines where they are now and saying, right, give that to Russia, let Russia keep what it's already got. However, a couple of things that Ukraine can keep, according to the Telegraph. So they're saying that Russia would be able to give back unhindered access to the mouth of the Dnipro River for Ukraine, and then also would withdraw from a second area of the Kherson province as well. And then the 6th point here is that the Ukraine would sign the minerals deal that we know that Donald Trump has been pushing for. And the 7th point here is about a new relationship between America and Russia, saying that all US sanctions would then be lifted and the US and Russia would cooperate on energy. There's way more detail in there, but that's just a brief overview of what the Telegraph has been briefed on in terms of a 7-point plan.
And clearly, this is something that's going to be very hard to land based on the breakdown of these talks. And again, it's clear that it's not top of their agenda anymore in the US with all the trade tariffs and stuff, and not that those discussions will be easy for Rachel Reeves this week either. I've gone for the front page of the Daily Mail. I mean, we could have picked a number of the newspapers for this, but Kemi PM owes apology to so many women. This follows her response to Bridget Phillipson's common statement yesterday on the Supreme Court decision last week. The reason I kind of bring it up and mention it is a lot of people suggesting she did very well yesterday, the leader of the opposition. One would expect that she would on this topic, perhaps, and it's been an age-old debate since she became leader as to whether she's successfully landing enough punches when the government presents the opportunity. And with that in mind, I'd just say this is a hugely important PMQs for her today. You snapshot her positioning on this and the Prime Minister's positioning on this. This should be a day of landing many blows on the government and the Prime Minister personally if she delivers.
Yeah, absolutely. Politically, she should really be, to an extent, I don't know, wiping the floor with Keir Starmer in terms of the fact that, irrespective of which way you fall on the debate, Kemi Badenoch's position has never changed, and therefore the advantage that she has politically is consistency, and the disadvantage that Keir Starmer has is inconsistency.
And saying that he welcomes clarity rather than leading, perhaps, on the issues. So we'll see how that goes. And it's a story in all the papers.
It is, exactly. So if you go into the inside pages of the Times, this is exactly what they're talking about. So they're talking about the fact that, and I was at this lobby briefing yesterday, the Prime Minister's spokesperson was asked directly whether Starmer thought a trans woman was a woman, and he said no. Now, that is new. That is a U-turn, because they actually have quoted here in 2022 when they spoke to Keir Starmer, and I'm going to read you the quote here. Keir Starmer says, a woman is a female adult, and in addition to that, trans women are women, and that is not just my view, that is actually the law. Now, that puts in direct contrast to exactly what the Prime Minister's spokesperson said yesterday. Now, this is the difficulty for Keir Starmer, is as much as the government likes to say that nothing has changed and their views have changed, they clearly have, and it doesn't really wash when they try and say that they've been consistent, because they absolutely have not. There's a quote here from J.K. Rowling as well, where she calls Keir Starmer a coward, and she says women have been persecuted, harassed, smeared, roughed up and forced to take employers to court for discrimination. They've suffered severe detriments purely for believing what the Supreme Court has ruled to be reasonable and correct. Imagine being such a coward. You can only muster the courage to tell the truth once the Supreme Court has ruled on what the truth is. And Kemi Badenoch, as you were saying, she called it a shameless work of fiction. And then we've got the whips now getting involved and saying that they are wanting WhatsApp groups to be closed down where MPs were talking about things. Remember, we had that leaked WhatsApps over the weekend where ministers and MPs were frustrated and maybe shocked by the Supreme Court ruling. We've had other leaks as well. And now Labour whips have demanded that these WhatsApp chats are shut down and essentially are set on broadcast-only settings, so people can't actually contribute. They can only just be sent things. MPs not happy about that. They say it's an infringement of freedom of speech. But nonetheless, clearly they feel that actually these leaks are causing damage.
They can't actually enforce that, can they?
Well, it looks like they have. Some of them have already been turned to broadcast only already. And there's quite a few MPs who are quoted here that are really quite furious about it and saying it defeats the point of the WhatsApp groups.
Well, I think also MPs have to be more careful in what they do and don't say in WhatsApp groups, because you know in today's world it gets screenshots or not. But the idea of the whip saying you can't talk to each other seems like a sort of rather ludicrous response. But if that's accurate, sort of sign of the times, perhaps. I've gone forward, we're running out of time. Reeves risk clash over youth mobility scheme with EU, saying risk a clash here with Yvette Cooper, by the way, who's joining us at 7:15, as Reeves is trying to strike a trade deal in the US. And, of course, Yvette Cooper has a target of getting migration down. It's interesting, if as part of a new trade deal with the EU, easier mobility for people under the age of 30 is a price to pay, I just wonder how that will poll. Everyone sort of thinks any number on immigration is going to go down terribly. But if it's sort of young people not necessarily taking up all jobs forever and so on and so forth, I'm not sure it would even poll that badly. But maybe it would. Either way, it's something that sounds like it's brewing between Reeves and Cooper.
Definitely. I mean, the headline will be growth versus Brexit betrayal. That will be the headline, right?
Which is going to be the headline, whether it's on fishing rights, youth mobility, food standards, all the rest of it. But I think that one is probably less down people's priorities. We shall see. But we've got 5 seconds left. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with all today's stories. Anna Botting, live in Rome after this.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first.
Good morning from Rome. The body of Pope Francis will be taken to St. Peter's Basilica this morning, where he will lie in an open coffin. Tens of thousands of pilgrims are expected to visit the Vatican to see the Pope lying in state.
Also ahead on The Breakfast Show this morning, top diplomats, including the Foreign Secretary David Lammy, pull out of talks in London on how to end the war in Ukraine. The chancellor's in Washington to push for a trade deal with the US after the IMF slashes the UK's growth forecast. And Manchester City put on a late show to beat Aston Villa and move into the Premier League's top three.
Hello there and good morning to you from Rome. The body of Pope Francis will be moved to St. Peter's Basilica this morning to lie in state in an open coffin until his funeral on Saturday morning. Well, tens of thousands of people are expected to travel to the Vatican over the next 3 days to pay their respects to the pontiff, who died on Easter Monday at the age of 88. Well, my colleague Barbara Serra is alongside me here. We are expecting to see the Pope's body in transition, as they call it. It is the time to go from private viewing to public viewing of his body.
Absolutely. It's the start of the second phase of the funeral, if you will, where the hundreds of thousands of people who have gathered and will continue to gather here in Rome will really get the last opportunity to see the Pope and pay their last respects.
Barbara, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's bring in our correspondent Lisa Holland, who's in Vatican City for us. And this is a significant moment, is it not? The Pope's body will be lying in state in St. Peter's Basilica, Lisa.
It is, and remember, of course, that Pope Francis was very much a pope who wanted to be amongst the people. So potentially within the mourning process, this is now the time, because this is when the people can pass by Pope Francis, who will be lying in state from 11 o'clock a local time this morning. You can see now the crowds really are building. It's just happened within literally the last couple of hours as we've been here this morning. People from all different countries, and of course some people have come specially, some people already found themselves in Rome. This is John, who's from Stockport in Greater Manchester. Good morning to you. You're on a pilgrimage here already?
Yes. We were due to come on Monday morning, and we arrived to the news that Pope Francis had died. So it kind of feels special to be here. Privilege and
now you're queuing to try to pass by his body lying in state. What does it mean to you to do that?
So he was such a special man who's done such great things in our world. We wanted to come and say thank you. And he's our spiritual leader, our teacher. So I think the legacy that he's brought to the world will be something important to carry on. So we're here to hope that that continues, and just simply to say thank you to him on a very human level, which is what was the most important thing to him, I believe.
Because, of course, that point exactly, that Pope Francis was a pope who wanted to be amongst the people, and today he will be, albeit lying in state.
I couldn't put it better than that. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're all here on a pilgrimage as Catholics.
Yes.
What sort of pope was the Pope for you as a Catholic, as a spiritual leader?
You know, it's kind of trite enough to say perfect, but he was the man for our times, and constantly speaking reconciliation, peace into our difficult world. So we think about Gaza, the Ukraine, our own political situation, you know, Europe, the world. He was always there trying to be the voice of wisdom, goodness, peace, everything that we would want him to do. Yeah, so we're happy to be here to say thank you, and also to be able to tell our children that we were here in this historic moment. Yeah.
John, thank you. Thank you so much for your words. Thanks so much. So the transition within the Catholic Church continues today. The Pope's body will be moved from the Casa Marta guest house, which is where he lived, to be put on display, lying in state, so that all of these people, his faithful, can say their goodbyes.
Lisa Holland amidst those crowds now queuing to see the Pope's body. Thank you very much indeed. So let's take a closer look then at what we expect to happen next. Unlike previous pontiffs, Pope Francis chose to live at the Casa Santa Marta rather than move to the papal apartment. His body has been placed in an open casket in the adjoining Santa Marta Chapel. Well, this morning his coffin will be transferred, as we've said, to St. Peter's Basilica. The Pope's body will lie in state for 3 days before his funeral on Saturday morning. So let's get more then on what we expect to see with our commentator Alistair Bruce. And we know that Cardinal Kevin Farrell, Camerlengo of the Church, will preside, Alistair. But what will we see of the traditional ritual of this transition today?
I think it's going to be a remarkable sight, particularly with the weather you have in Rome. And we will see the Pope's coffin emerge from the chapel of the Casa Santa Marta and come into the private squares there. And it will be escorted not only by the choir singing, but also by all the cardinals present and the clergy and those who worked with him in his role as Supreme Pontiff. And the music will be almost mesmeric, I think, particularly as they start what's called the Litany of the Saints, when each of the saints are called to pray for those gathering to honour the Pope as he is placed in St. Peter's. It will be a beautiful sight. It will be in the most extraordinary setting. And what we will witness is the translation of the body from the private chapel, which he knew well, to the most public of theatres, in the sense that the whole Basilica of St. Peter's is such a magnificent sight. And that is the perfect location for someone who has served in this august office, and yet in such a simple way, to be seen by all those faithful who wish to come and pay their final respects.
And he is, of course, the figurehead of a global church, 1.4 billion Catholics around the world. But why is this point of seeing a body so important in faiths, in the Catholic faith?
Well, different nations have different traditions, and it always was the papal tradition that popes would be carried on a bier lying in their chasuble, ready for mass, as it were. But this Pope has decided he wishes to be placed within his coffin immediately, and so we will see the open coffin carried to St. Peter's, which is not something that is often seen in the United Kingdom. So I think it will be, for people around the world, a powerful image of the late Pope being carried in this very ceremonial way, surrounded by the priests who served him in his pontificate, and going into this massive, great basilica that is at the heart of Catholicism in the Vatican City. And it is going to be an overwhelming theatre in which this very humble, simple man who has completed his task can be viewed by all those who choose to come into a place that was designed by perhaps the greatest artists of the world, the greatest architects of the world at the time it was erected all those years ago.
Alistair, obviously you will join us again a little later. For now, thank you very much indeed. Well, let us bring in Barbara, Sarah. Just a beautiful spot to stand in to see St. Peter's Basilica, the crowds beginning to gather. And this is an important stepping stone towards his final burial location, which is outside the city.
It is. It's Santa Maria Maggiore, which is about 20 minutes. And interestingly, because he's the first pope for a very long time to be buried outside the Vatican, we're going to see a procession, a little bit like a state funeral, perhaps, between here and the other church. It's very interesting, though. This, I think, is the phase that almost he would have cared about the most, because this is the one where people, the thousands who've gathered here in Rome, can actually go and pay their respects in person. And I think that being here in person is something that's very important to Catholics that come to Rome. Because, for example, his Sunday message, the Angelus, the one he gave every Sunday, is televised. It's televised in Italy. You can watch it across the world. But for a lot of people, it's the point of being here, of watching him, either as they used to watch him speak at the balcony balcony and now being able to pay their respects. If we look back to 20 years ago when Pope John Paul II, he lay in state for 4 days, and there were 12-hour waits, and the numbers vary, but at least 600,000. We've even seen numbers of over 1 million. So we are expecting a lot of people here to pay their last respects.
Yes, we'll certainly see how many turn up. And in terms of the funeral itself, on Saturday, as we learnt, this time yesterday, the expectation is it'll be between 200,000 and 500,000 people who may turn up, including 170 heads of state and presidential delegations. That is what the Vatican and the Italian authorities are expecting. A huge security operation, clearly, for Saturday's events and indeed for today. Our coverage will continue a little bit later on. Join us again before 8 o'clock when we expect to see that transition of the Pope's body to St. Peter's Basilica behind us. Wilfred.
Anna, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Now, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has pulled out of talks on how to end the war in Ukraine that he was due to host in London this morning. Mari's here to tell us a bit more about this. Mari, as recently as yesterday, this was going to be a big moment. Secretary Rubio was coming, others too.
Exactly, and now it feels like it's all kind of fell apart. So the talks are technically still ongoing, but they're not going to be on the same level, the same seniority as previously planned. So originally, as you say, it was David Lammy who was hosting his counterparts from the US, from France, from Germany, from Ukraine. And this was talks about ending the war in Ukraine. And then Secretary of State for the US, Marco Rubio, pulled out, then David Lammy pulled out, then the French and Germans pulled out. And so now we've got a situation where Keith Kellogg, Special Envoy for the US, he is going to be meeting with French and German officials, but not Ukrainian officials as far as we understand it. We then understand that separately, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister is going to be meeting with David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, for bilateral talks. And we understand from tweets that were posted late last night, that David Lammy and Marco Rubio had a phone call. They both described it as productive. David Lammy tweeted, "The UK is working with the US, Ukraine, Europe for peace and to put an end to Putin's illegal invasion. Talks continue at pace and officials will meet in London tomorrow." And then Secretary of State Marco Rubio also said, "Today I had a productive conversation with Foreign Secretary David Lammy. I extended my gratitude for hosting the US delegation led by Special Envoy Kellogg. Our team is looking forward to substantive and good technical meetings with Ukrainian and UK counterparts." And he goes on to talk about how he's looking forward to more meetings and discussions. The difficulty now is the kind of context on this. So the pressure from the Trump administration on Ukraine to agree some sort of a peace deal. We understand there's a US proposal which would see the UK recognise Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. Zelensky actually rejected that yesterday. And also there's been reporting in the newspapers this morning that there's a proposal that would freeze the front lines where they are and essentially give that territory to Russia. That is not going to please the Ukrainians and looks like perhaps that's one of the reasons why these talks have started to fall apart.
Mari, great stuff as always. Thanks so much. We're going to give you some of today's other stories now. And the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has pledged to defend Britain's interests as she prepares to meet fellow finance ministers in Washington to push for a trade deal with the US. The IMF has cut the UK's growth forecast from 1.6% to 1.1%. Talks aimed at ending the long-running bin strike in Birmingham will resume later. Bin workers from the Unite Union have been striking since March in a row over pay and jobs. The government has called on both sides to negotiate a deal. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has slammed the Prime Minister's response to the Supreme Court ruling on the definition of a woman, demanding he apologise to those who lost jobs or were harassed. Sir Keir Starmer said yesterday that the ruling gives real clarity so that guidance can be put in place. The issue is likely to come up at Prime Minister's questions today at midday, and it will certainly come up, I can assure you, when we speak to the Home Secretary in the next 5 minutes or so. But now we have a different political story, a breaking political story from our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who's got an exclusive about the future of the Conservative Party. Sam, good morning to you. What can you tell us?
Well, as you know, ever since the general election, there's been a titanic battle between the Conservatives and Reform UK for those voters on the right of British politics. But what can the Tories do about it at this point where, for instance, today, the Tories are 5 percentage points behind Reform UK in the latest Sky YouGov poll. Well, we've got the thinking of one big beast who gave his thoughts in private when addressing students last month. That's Robert Jenrick. He's the Shadow Justice Secretary. He's also, of course, the person who came second to Kemi Badenoch for the leadership contest last year. Now, have a listen in a moment to how he thinks you should deal with reform, both what he thinks about what he's doing now, which is to fight it, but listen to what he says you might have to do in future. Here's what he was saying.
My worry is that they become a kind of permanent or semi-permanent fixture on the British political scene. And if that is the case, and I say, I am trying to do everything I can to stop that being the case, then life becomes a lot harder for us, because the right is not united. You head towards a general election where the nightmare scenario is that Keir Starmer sails in through the middle as a result of the two parties being disunited. And I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared for that to happen. I want the right to be united. And so one way or another, I'm determined to do that, and to bring this coalition together and make sure that we make these elections.
So what you've got there, Wilf, is that Robert Jenrick absolutely emphatic that you cannot have, by the time of the next election, Reform UK and the Tories competing for votes. You can only have them, well, I suppose he means working together. He absolutely denies he's talking about some kind of pact, but at the same time, he's very much hinting that he was prepared to do whatever it takes in order for there to be no division between the two parties. Look, over 170 seats saw the vote for reform bigger than the Tory loss at the last election. There's no doubt that Reform UK harms the Conservatives dramatically, and there are plenty of conversations amongst Tory MPs and other Conservatives that something needs to be done between the two parties. How does Robert Jenrick try and get the two parties not to compete? I have to say these comments aren't unhelpful should there be a future leadership contest. A source close to Robert Jenrick says he was talking about voters, not parties. But in the end, you have a senior Tory politician there, Wilf, making absolutely clear that he is not prepared to allow the two parties to be in conflict, but not spelling out what he would do. But I think people will make up their own minds about how he thinks that you might have to change tack in future to deal with this, something that Kemi Badenoch appears not to be prepared to countenance.
Sam, so many questions that jump to mind on this. I mean, the first one is whether this was intentionally said in a way that would one day reach a efficient journalist like yourself. I mean, if you're speaking to a university kind of conservative group, it's certainly not completely private, even if it was under Chatham House rules. The second point is quite how groundbreaking what he said is or not. I mean, to use the phrase to say, once we get into an election, I don't want the right to be divided, is a long way short of saying, I will propose a merger of the two parties. And I know the rhetoric was somewhere in between, but there's certainly room for interpretation on this to say that it's not necessarily that groundbreaking, and perhaps it's just a pitch to appeal to certain voters by letting this get out there?
So I think there is no doubt that Robert Jenrick absolutely knows what he's doing, whether he's speaking to student event in London and the freedom that he has to go a little bit further compared to what he would do over when speaking in the House of Commons or on telly. Undoubtedly, he knows the different levels of wiggle room he has, the different levels of freedom he has to speak out. And I think he was exercising that in full knowledge that maybe not every single person in the room was somebody who was politically friendly towards him. But at the same time, Will, there is a debate that is not being had in public by the top level of the Conservative Party, but these kind of comments suggest that is being had in private by them. I think these comments do go further than I've seen from members of the shadow cabinet. It's that phrase, one way or another, I'm determined to make sure the right is united. Well, one way or another suggests that he's prepared to go further than the official position of the Conservative Party at the moment. If you listen to that clip again, Wilf, he makes clear that for now, the job of the Conservative Party is to defeat Reform UK, but appears to suggest that as you head towards a general election, that might change. And it's that suggestion that you might have to pivot strategy in some way because you can't let Keir Starmer in again. I think that's where you get into an interesting discussion. Well, if things need to change and you concede that you can't defeat Reform UK, what do you do then? If it's not some kind of pact coupon election where one party informally stands aside for another arrangement or whatever, there are all sorts of things parties can do that range from formal deals right down to the thing that some people think that the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats did at the last election, which is just make sure that they didn't compete in the same areas without ever formally talking to each other or ever being caught informally talking to each other. So there's a huge, great scope of things. It seems to me that Robert Jenrick is more prepared to have bits of this discussion than his boss, Kemi Badenoch.
Sam, great stuff. Thanks so much. Much appreciated with that breaking exclusive, more written up on the Sky News website and app. Now, the Chancellor has arrived in Washington for talks with her US counterpart at the International Monetary Fund's spring gathering. Rachel Reeves is under pressure to secure a trade deal, a mission more urgent now that the UK's growth forecast has been downgraded. Our business and economics correspondent Gurpreet Narwan has this report.
Spring in DC. And a rude awakening for the world's finance ministers and central bankers gathered here at the IMF to hear its latest verdict on global growth. Back in the autumn, everyone was wondering if Donald Trump could take the election. The seasons have changed. Now they're wondering how much damage he could do. The verdict from the IMF's economists is sobering.
Now, while global growth remains well above recession levels, all regions are negatively impacted this year and next. Tensions will greatly impact global trade.
High up on the list, the obvious victims, like the US, China and Mexico. But the UK too, which had its growth forecast slashed by a third.
You've downgraded the UK's growth forecasts quite sharply and given a range of explanations from higher tariff barriers to more domestic issues like cost of living pressures. Out of those, so the global challenges versus the domestic challenges, which one is weighing more heavily on the UK's growth forecasts?
In terms of the 0.5 percentage point downward revision that we're seeing for the UK, the domestic factors are probably the biggest ones. And in particular, there is a lower carryover from weaker growth in the second half of last year. There is also some tightening of financial conditions as interest rates have risen.
So the economists here at the IMF have just given their take, and it was an important reminder that the UK actually has other things to worry about beyond tariffs. Yes, they're unleashing turmoil on the global economy, but in Britain, it's actually things like rising energy bills that have the potential to cause more damage.
A reminder that economies already have existing issues to deal with. In the US, recent high economic growth may insulate businesses from a full-blown recession. But inflation is an old problem, and it's about to get a lot worse. And never is that more obvious than at lunchtime.
So we're in Eastern Market in Capitol Hill. It's just celebrated its 150th birthday. And while 2 centuries ago, much of the stuff here would have been grown in America, if we look around now, a lot of the stuff's actually imported. We've got some dates over there that definitely weren't grown in America. We've got dried pasta from Italy, Parma ham from Spain, and over there, some cheddar from the UK. US customers have global tastes, and some of them will begrudgingly pay the price for the stuff they value.
For this one, last week, the lady he always ordering for me, he told me she's go up.
At Canali's Deli, customers know nothing compares to the Spanish cured meats. Rosemary, who runs the business with her son, has already had to put up prices in recent years. She doesn't know how much more customers will absorb.
Are you worried about the impact this is going to have on your business?
How the people want to pay, maybe in this month, in 2 months, 3 months, I don't know.
But in that time, businesses might put off decisions or stall investment. For the global economy, it's not just tariffs, but the uncertainty that can kill you too.
Gurpreet Narwan there for us. Let's have a very quick look at the newspapers before we bring in the government. The Telegraph leading on Ukraine, saying that President Trump will allow Putin to keep almost all of the territory he seized in a proposed peace settlement. The Daily Mail saying the Kemi Badenoch saying the Prime Minister owes women an apology after he said a woman is an adult female, appearing to backtrack on his previous stance on trans rights. Well, we're able to drop the papers because we're now joined by the government and Dame Diana Johnson, the Minister for Crime, Policing and Fire. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Delighted to see you, Dame Diana. We've been teasing and promoting all morning the Home Secretary, but she decided not to come and you've taken her place.
Well, I'm not sure what happened there, but I was always going to come and do the media round this morning. So
well, it was certainly not always.
Okay.
You're fantastic. It certainly wasn't the case for all of yesterday, but so be it. These things, of course, happen. What are you guys announcing today?
So we're announcing a new set of proposals around vetting of police officers, those officers who are a risk to the public and to their colleagues. At the moment, there isn't a way of removing them, of dismissing them from the Office of Police Constable. So this is about a bespoke way of identifying those officers who can't hold their vetting because of the background checks that are made and making sure that there is a swift, easy but fair way of removing them from the police service. That hasn't ever happened before, and I think the public will be quite shocked to know that.
On the topic of Ukraine peace talks, Marco Rubio's pulled out of talks. That's led to David Lammy to then pull out of talks. What's going on?
Well, as I understand it, David Lammy hasn't pulled out of the talks. He's hosting the talks. And, of course, this country has a clear commitment to getting peace in Ukraine. President Zelensky is committed to peace. We need President Putin to step up, to have that ceasefire, to commit to the peace talks. The government has recently announced another £330 million to support Ukraine in terms of particularly new drones to help them in their fight. So the talks will be going ahead today, but I'm not able to provide any further comment on that. Those negotiations have to carry on.
Yeah, our understanding is now at a lower level, and that Foreign Secretary and Secretary of State level won't be attending. But I guess we'll see later on in the day. Wanted to talk to you about the Supreme Court decision last week. The Prime Minister said yesterday, it was the first time we'd heard from him since it, that a woman is a female adult, and I actually welcome the judgment, the Supreme Court judgment. It gives real clarity. He didn't in any way mention that he'd been wrong in the past, nor did he apologise. Should he have done so?
Well, what I know about the Prime Minister is that he always follows the rule of law. And I think the Supreme Court, with their decision last week, set out very clearly what the Equality Act of 2010 actually means in terms of biological sex, not legal sex. And I think that's really helpful. And I think it deals with the fact there's been this confusion over the last few years about this issue.
A confusion that I think he has in large part contributed to. There's lots of quotes I could read you, but I think this one sums it up. He told The Times in 2022, a woman is a female adult. In addition to that, trans women are women, and that's not just my view, that is actually the law. That statement is wrong.
Well, it is wrong, actually, because the Supreme Court said very clearly last week that it is around biological sex. So we know that a woman is an adult female, adult human female. That's what the law says. It's biological sex. And that clarity, I think, is helpful to everybody. The NHS, policing, schools and education, we all need to have that clarity now so we can move forward and put in place the measures that will respect that. And equally, I think we do need to be respectful of those individuals, trans individuals, and making sure that they are supported and they have the services that they need too.
Absolutely right. I guess I come back to that point. You said that there was great confusion. I think that statement makes clear that the Prime Minister, a person in a great leadership position, even when Leader of the Opposition, contributed to that.
Could I just say to you there that, in fact, we've only been in power since last July. For 14 years, the previous government did not take steps to actually deal with that confusion. So I do think it is a little rich of the current Leader of the Opposition to be pointing the finger at the Prime Minister, who has been very clear now that what the law says. So I do think for 14 years, the previous government, if they wanted to, they could have sorted this out.
That might be true, but the leader of the opposition today, I don't think, has ever hidden from this issue. So I don't think it's rich of her personally. But if she was here...
She was a member of the previous government, though, a senior member for many years, and had strong views. I agree with you on this. She set her case out very strongly. But that does not mean that the fact that the previous government didn't take steps to deal with this...
And if she was here, if Rishi Sunak was here, if David Cameron was here, if any number of those people here, I'd be pressing them on this. But they're not. You're a member of the current government.
Yeah.
You said the Prime Minister likes to follow the law. Where's leadership? Where is coming out in front, owning up to your mistakes and apologising to the damage that you might have done?
Well, I think we're now very clear what the law says and what the 2010 Act, which the Labour government obviously brought in around this issue. So I think what I'm really interested in now is how we move forward and how we protect women. We've always been very clear about protecting women-only spaces. That's always been Labour's position on this. But I think what's very helpful is the Supreme Court judgment, providing that clarity about what the Equality Act in 2010, which Labour introduced, actually means in terms of biological sex. That's something I've always supported. So I want to be very clear about that as well.
And you don't begrudge that the Prime Minister didn't support it?
I think, as I've said, there was confusion for a number of years on this issue, and I think what's helpful now is that we are all very clear about what this means and going forward, what this will mean for single-sex services, for what the NHS and for me as the policing minister, what this means for policing. In terms of, I was talking to a senior police officer yesterday, and we were talking about strip searching, and we were talking about the need for changing rooms that meet the needs of males and females and those people who identify as trans.
I mean, you're saying that you've always been clear. Because I prepared to interview Yvette Cooper, I haven't checked your past statements, so I'll take you at your word on that.
I've always been very clear on this.
And I totally acknowledge that then. But your leader, the Prime Minister, hasn't been. He is a legal expert, and he couldn't interpret the law accurately. And it's ask a question about common sense, and he didn't take it accurately. And you're saying what's important now is that we move forward. Can you move forward if you don't acknowledge a mistake and, indeed, don't apologise for the damage it's done? Do you think that people like Rosie Duffield deserve an apology?
Can I say to you, I think, as a woman, I'm not particularly interested in what men think or feel about issues around women's rights. What I'm interested in is the law. And what's really helpful from that Supreme Court judgment last week is the clarity it provides. And I think following the law is absolutely the right thing to do, and that's why I welcome what the Prime Minister has said about that is the law of the land, and that's now where we move forward.
You can criticise me, you can say my view is irrelevant or you like as a man.
I'm not personalising this, I'm just saying...
You're personalising it as it relates to the Prime Minister. He's the Prime Minister. Yeah. Whether he's a man or woman is irrelevant.
Well, actually,
his view is critically important on all topics.
It is, absolutely.
Just to say because he's a man, we can excuse his error here.
No, I'm not saying that.
That is what you said.
No, I'm saying that what I'm interested in is what the law of the land actually says. And the law of the land,
and you've
very clear
acknowledged
last
that
week.
the Prime Minister got this wrong. Can he move forward without acknowledging that?
I think there's been confusion about this, and that's why the case went to the Supreme Court. We know what happened in Scotland. We know that there was the need to get clarity, and that's why it went to the Supreme Court. So I think recognising that is quite important, and having that judgment from the Supreme Court, I think, is really helpful to the Prime Minister, to me as the policing minister, to the government, to the NHS, to policing. I think this is really important and helpful.
Because we're out of time. I mean, I still don't understand that you can't say that the Prime Minister should acknowledge an error.
Well, I think the Prime Minister can speak for himself. He doesn't need me to speak for him. And he's been very clear that he accepts the law now as the Supreme Court set out last week.
The final question I would say on this, because it comes back to something in your department, is some of the placards in the protests we saw over the weekend Do they go as far as inciting violence in your eyes?
Well, that's a very interesting point, and I have raised that directly with the Metropolitan Police. I was told that the placards that were on social media that were being shown as at that protest on Saturday were historic. They were not the placards that were being used. Now, I've had this raised with me already this morning. I'm very happy to go and raise that again with the Metropolitan Police. And clearly, if there's incitement in those placards, threats to individuals, that has to be looked at. That's a matter for the police, but I'm happy to raise that.
Dame Diana Johnson, we thank you for stopping by. Good to see you this morning.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, we'll be live in Rome with Sky's Anna Bottom and speak to two Catholics about the future of the Church following the death of Pope Francis.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way. They are pushing forward, trying to get people to disperse.
What Prince Harry wanted to do was to eject me.
Is that your opinion?
It is. It is.
They were serious, coordinated attacks.
It's an entire generation that will have to contend with the horrifying impacts of this conflict. The number of patients is increasing.
It's been quite some day.
Hey, what country are you
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country?
You've gone viral.
I've ever had such a reaction.
It's just incredible.
Since the Oval Office meeting, have they reached out to you?
If Ukraine asks for help and its allies decide to help, then that's the end of it.
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
A historic day here today.
Beth Rigby from Sky. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
There could be some more painful decisions to come.
Thank you. Thank you all.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want to jump in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty? I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first.
Well, welcome back and good morning to you from Rome. The body of Pope Francis will be moved to St. Peter's Basilica this morning to lie in state in an open coffin until his funeral on Saturday morning. Tens of thousands of people are expected to travel to the Vatican over the next 3 days to pay their respects to the pontiff who died on Easter Monday at the age of 88. We will bring you that live from 8 o'clock this morning as his coffin is moved into St. Peter's Basilica. Well, let's bring in my colleague Barbara Serra. And it is at that point that the public will be invited to share the grief. It's been private so far behind the walls of the Vatican.
It has been. So the Pope obviously died 2 days ago, and until now he's been lying in state, but in the Santa Marta residence, in the chapel where he used to pray. So the people that would have been able to go and see him up until now would have been like the papal household or Vatican residents, people who worked with him, people who knew him, who would have wanted to pay their last respect act in a more private setting, even though it has to be said that we were also shown pictures of him lying in state in that chapel. So now it becomes public, and we're going to see that very soon, the procession from the Santa Marta residence. It's a very short trip, but into St. Peter's Basilica, and then he'll be lying in state for 3 days. And that is when the thousands, and it's hard to know exactly, but if we look at previous examples, Pope John Paul II, for example, we could be talking about hundreds of thousands of people will get the opportunity to see him lying in state before the funeral. And I think for a lot of people who come to Rome, I think it's very important to see his body. It'll be an open casket, for example, which, you know, may strike us in Europe as something a little bit odd. It isn't in other parts of the world, but it very much goes hand in hand with what Francis always wanted to bring, the physicality of the papacy. He wanted to, you know, his body almost to embody the papacy and the Catholicism. So that's what we're going to be seeing over the next couple of days.
OK, Barbara, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's speak now to two young Catholics. We're joined by the journalist at The Spectator, Margaret Mitchell, and also by 19-year-old Catholic and medicine student Lucy Savage. Very good morning to both of you. Lucy, why don't you kick off for us? Church attendance numbers in the Catholic Church have been increasing. You know, why is that, do you think? And is it a Pope Francis specific thing?
Yes, I think that it's real great news that there's been a rise in church attendance. I think that most definitely Pope Francis and his life appealed to young people. He exemplified the church's central message of love and was a great example of showing people how to treat others with respect and kindness and compassion. Even just last Thursday, he was visiting a prison in Rome, personally chatting to each of the inmates. And I think this shows that Christ's love is for all. And he was a real great listener. And I think this gift of a listening ear helped him to champion the causes of young people. He prayed for peace all over the world. He was a great advocate for caring for the environment, for God's creation, Mother Earth. And even just by his papal namesake, St. Francis of Assisi, who's the patron saint of ecology. And I think he was able to really gauge the voice of the church and the voice of the world by his engagement in social media, particularly Twitter, where he was able to really listen to what the church wanted and the church needed. And I think there's a real appeal of Catholicism to the youth. In his document, Christus Vivit, Christ is alive, he is our hope. He addresses young people individually and really sets out their role in the church. And I know that there are lots of projects that went off of that. I was involved in one from the Diocese of Westminster Youth Ministry, where it was equipping young people to be able to boldly live out their faith and really live out their lives in the hope of Jesus and in love. And I think broadly the Catholic Church has a great sense of community, of belonging. I think this is rooted in identity of being children of Christ and also the great tradition of the Catholic Church. And I think that, I know as me as a young person, like my university CathSoc, and I work in volunteering with a charity called the Ascent UK, which is really about motivating young people, teenagers, into a journey of discipleship. And I think that Pope Francis helped us to look outwardly with love and with hope and to get a real sense of giving, of that Christ-like compassion.
Yes, and certainly the use of social media he found absolutely critical during COVID, didn't he? You know, a Pope who wanted to look outward. I spoke to a priest yesterday who said he wanted us to get out as part of his Jesuit missionary tradition almost. You know, that COVID era was very difficult for him. But Margaret, do you agree it was some of those issues that were important to him are important to young people, and that's really why you see this interest from younger generations?
Yes, I definitely think that there's this appeal of Pope Francis as a servant leader, as this very humble man who cares about the poor and the imprisoned and the weak. I do think that, honestly, there is a large contingent of younger Catholics who may not have been so fond of a lot of Pope Francis's policies. And it's and at least in America, where I come from, there is a huge contingent of traditional Latin Mass goers. And, you know, while all of these people do love the Pope, I think that his term as pontiff has been quite difficult for some of them. And I think you're seeing a lot of more conservative young men turning back to the church. and they may diverge from Pope Francis on some crucial issues, that may disagree with him on his, his change in teaching around blessing gay couples or allowing people who are divorced to have communion. So I think that he does, he leaves this great legacy of being in the legacy of St. Francis. But I do think that there's a bit of confusion and dissent still in the church, and that does exist among young people.
And Lucy, just quickly, are you worried about who comes next? Do you want it to be somebody in the mirror image of Francis with that commitment to those issues, the environment you've mentioned for one, migration? He was very outspoken on Gaza, for example. Do you want it to be somebody who looks outward like that and comes across as a caring human being?
Yes, I think that's really important. I think that he was a great example of being the ultimate, an ultimate servant of Christ, an example of modern discipleship. And I think that hopefully his legacy will continue in the work of the church and in the lives of all the people that Pope Francis touched. I think that it would be great to still have someone that champions those causes. I know that the church is in a time of mourning after his death, but I think we should also celebrate Pope Francis' life and all that he achieved. And I think that this is a time of hope. In the Jubilee year, we're called to be pilgrims of hope for the new Pope, and I hope that he continues the legacy of Pope Francis.
Lucy Savage and Margaret Mitchell, thanks to both of you. And clearly our coverage continues. You can see some of the crowds in St. Peter's Square now. We are expecting the transfer of the Pope's body from the chapel of his residence to the Basilica that you can see there. And then a little later, the public viewing will begin of the body of Pope Francis.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The only way to Gaza for us right now is with the Israeli military. The IDF had brought us in to show us a tunnel network under a residential neighbourhood.
The length of time it must have to have created these tunnels must have taken years.
At the end of the day, it's war at the top. It's war down here.
I'm Alistair Bunkle, Sky's Middle East correspondent based here in Jerusalem. As we were filming, there was a gun battle in the next street.
This neighbourhood, the Israeli military say, was the stronghold of Hamas's Rafah brigade.
It was just after 6:30 a.m. when the first shots were fired.
I remember everything. It was a day that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget.
There's no moon, perfect conditions for smugglers and human traffickers trying to move fuel, weapons and people.
The valleys in between, they're some of the main smuggling routes.
After days of negotiation, a major smuggler here has agreed to meet us.
The families that we've spoken to of people who have died trying to cross into Europe, they say you're a murderer. Are you a murderer? No.
Sky News, get the full story first. Begum was 15 when she left East London with 2 school friends to join Islamic State in Syria.
Do you feel that you have committed a crime to the extent that you should serve time in a British prison?
I mean, I feel like the only crime I committed was coming here.
If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. I can take the heat. The second thing that Harry Truman said, was in politics, if you want a friend, get a dog.
My children will love a dog.
In Tel Aviv, a constant streak of interceptions filled the night sky as waves of missiles came in.
It appears to be a very, very large and sustained attack on Israel.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Back to Rome, and the body of Pope Francis will shortly be moved to St. Peter's Basilica to lie in state in an open coffin until his funeral on Saturday morning. Tens of thousands of people are expected to travel to the Vatican over the next 3 days to pay their respects to the pontiff who died on Easter Monday at the age of 88. The scene there in St. Peter's Square ahead of his transfer to the Basilica. We saw a little earlier pictures too of the chapel where he is currently lying in rest, the Santa Marta Domus. It's close to where he stayed. It is the guest house, in fact, for the cardinals who come for the conclave. He came for that of the conclave of Benedict the 16th and decided to stay, choosing not to move into the grander papal apartments, staying at the Casa Santa Marta throughout his time as pontiff, and it is from that location that he will be moved. The skyline over the Vatican, over this city of Rome, expectant now as the public get their chance to say goodbye and to say thank you to Pope Francis. Well, he is, of course, from outside of Italy. Traditionally, popes have been European. He was the first from the Americas, the first from Latin America. And I'm joined now by Manuel Deza, the program coordinator for Scholas Ochrentes, a youth education movement founded in 2001 to honour Pope Francis. And just remind us where you've come from, first of all.
Thank you for having us. I'm from Argentina. I have been living here in Rome and also in the United States, and with Scholas traveling all around.
So what did it mean to Argentina to have one of your own as pontiff?
I think he represents an Argentinian style of being, and from the Catholic, we have we call it the church in Latin America. It's very close to the poor, to the borders, and I think Pope Francis brings this to Europe and to the world. And I think he represents this being close, even though you are not Catholic. This closeness, it's what he brings to the world.
So that idea of being amongst the people and closeness, how important would it be for him, this part of the process, that the people who are lining up already in St. Peter's Square and beyond would have a chance to see him in person?
He planned this. And yesterday we were in Santa Marta, the Scholas team giving him a goodbye with all his team and the Vatican dependents. And I think he planned this in a humble way for all the people, and to also, in this end, to be close and not to create that distance from the Holy Father. No, it's just a priest that is passing away, and it's giving also a message today for the world.
So we're seeing pictures now inside the chapel at St. Martha's house, Casa Santa Marta, the Santa Marta Domus, as they call it. Are you saying you went in there?
Yes, yesterday night.
Can you describe the scene then to us?
It was very sad for us. Every time Scholas met with the Pope, it was with young people and happiness and closeness. And I think yesterday all the people that was there was saying goodbye, but also, as he said, it's a new beginning. I think his mission, his legacy, it's quite big. We continue understanding the message of Pope Francis in the world, and I think yesterday was that kind of, okay, this is the end. We are saying goodbye to his body, but a new chapter is starting. It's beginning.
It is very emotional for those of you who worked in his cause to go and stand and look at his body in repose there. Yes. Dressed with his bishop's mitre on, the red vestments, the rosary, his hands crossed. Were there tears amongst those of you who were in there?
Yes, yes. I just came back from Indonesia, his last apostolic journey. We are doing Scholas there, and for me yesterday was tough in a personal sense. because the last time that we have a meeting with him was in the audience, Wednesday audience, general audience. We brought a group of kids from Israel, United States, and Palestine to meet with him, and he was okay. This was 2 months ago. Always with a smile, always with that sense of humor that was very Pope Francis style, and giving this encouragement to the young people to keep trying to make the impossible things that this war is telling us, the culture, how difficult it is to gathering, encounter. He was also, in this time of this very deep conflict, he was with a smile telling them how beautiful it's peace instead of conflict. And now, like this end, we were not expecting this. But as I was saying, this is just a new beginning. I think his legacy is quite big, and it's just, I think, for the church and for the world. We are losing an incredible leader, but his job and his mission is still alive.
Yes, it was certainly a shock because we saw him on Easter Sunday. You know, he met J.D. Vance, the US Vice President. He blessed babies in the square. He appeared for the service. You know, he wrote messages about conflict that you mentioned, about looking after migrants, those in need in society. But tell us about your foundation, set up. Well, he started to talk about the need for a special school to help the needy after a financial crisis in Argentina, didn't he? So what is it that you try to do?
For the very beginning, Argentina has this world record Guinness about having 5 presidents in 1 week. So in that time, he decided to call the young people and the religious leaders to create a gathering among teenagers to ask how they were living that crisis. And he called not just Catholics, if not Muslims, Jewish. Buenos Aires, it's a very diverse community. So he created a big group of young people to ask them, how are you? How are you feeling in this crisis? That project started growing in Buenos Aires within schools and became a public policy, always with teenagers, high schools, teachers, always education, and always not giving content, if not giving a space to express. And always with this very clear message, we don't want just the rich people, we have to put what the culture is dividing. So rich people, poor people, all together, Jewish, Muslims, Catholics, Christians, non-denominational religious also. And then he became the Pope. No one was expecting an Argentinian becoming the Pope. So then he called the project manager of this in Buenos Aires, and Escuela starts with a message that having the Pope of the world, we visit many, always putting together young people.
Manuel, your work continues clearly, and I'm sure Pope Francis would be proud of the work that you do. We really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed, and describing the emotion of going in to see the body of Pope Francis for yourself and with your colleagues. So let's bring in our commentator then, Alistair Bruce, and a first-person account of how moving it is to go into the Santa Marta Domus, Alistair, to see the body of Pope Francis before this transition.
Yes, and to hear the very personal view of somebody who, like the cardinals here, visited the coffin of Pope Francis here in the chapel of the Domus Santa Marta. We're witnessing the start of the liturgy of the translation, which will translate or move the body of Pope Francis from this small chapel set beside the wall of the Vatican City into the heart of St. Peter's Basilica. In peace here, the Pope, as he has laid at rest, surrounded by prayers and the recipient of prayers from around the world, guarded here, as he always was, by the Swiss Guard, who, in their tricolour state uniforms, are on duty in respect to their former master. The liturgy will begin at 8 o'clock and will be led by the Cardinal Camerlengo, Cardinal Kevin Farrell. He was the Chamberlain to the household of Pope Francis and is the only one of the appointments at the curial government of St. Peter's and of the Roman Catholic Church to hold office to see through the final requirements of Pope Francis. Among these cardinals dressed in choir dress are many that will be the cardinal electors at the conclave that will be called on the 5th of May to choose the successor to St. Peter in this long line of popes that takes us back 2,000 years. The ceremony will begin with the singing of an antiphon. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. Beneath the simple Latin inscription that we will hear sung later on in this procession, come, Holy Ghost, and fill the hearts of the faithful. It's 8 o'clock. You're watching Sky News at the beginning of the liturgy of the translation of Pope Francis from the chapel where he prayed daily to St. Peter's, the great basilica where he will lie in state. Outside, the procession is ready to The celebrant will now begin the service in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and will then scatter holy water upon the
In
coffin.
nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Spes Christi, quia mortuus surrexit, sit cum omnibus vobis.
Memento mei, Domine Deus, dum veneris in regnum tuum. Dominus pascit me et nihil mihi tenit, in pascuis virentibus me collocavit. Memento mei, Domine Deus, dum veneris in regnum tuum.
Fratres et sorores carissimi,
Brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow, we now accompany the mortal remains of our Pope Francis to the Vatican Basilica, where he often exercised his ministry as Bishop of the Church which is in Rome and as pastor to the Universal Church. As we now leave this home, let us thank the Lord for the countless gifts that he bestowed on the Christian people. Let us ask Almighty God, in his mercy and kindness, to grant to the late Pope an eternal home in the kingdom of heaven, and to comfort with celestial hope the papal family, the Church in Rome, and the faithful throughout the world.
Servi tue, Domine, Papae nostri Francisci, vitam et opera benignus respice. Accipe eum in domum perpetue lucis et pacis.
Kindly look on the life and works of your servant, our Pope Francis. Welcome him into the dwelling of perpetual light, and grant that your faithful people may follow fervently in the footsteps, bearing witness to the gospel of Jesus, who lives and reigns forever and ever. And so begins the procession. There will be sentences and prayers as the coffin is conveyed to St. Peter's. It is always traditional that priests and bishops, and of course the Pope, are laid in their coffins in churches with their head towards the cross, whereas those who are the faithful and are not priestly are placed with their feet towards the cross. And the reason is that when standing, they would be facing either the congregation or part of it. And so we will see in that format, with the attendant cardinals here present, the Pope will be conveyed, as though still a priest, to the central Basilica of the Roman Catholic Church. The first psalm that will be sung in this procession will be Psalm 22. It reflects the desire of Pope Francis always to smell of the sheep as the shepherd amongst his people. The words go, "The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I shall not want. Near restful waters he leads me, he revives my soul. He guides me along the right path for the sake of his name. Though I should walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. As we see the door that every day the Pope would have used to come into and leave his home, the Casa Santa Marta, and the great bell sounds over the Basilica as it calls him back to its heart. The statue of Christ with, on the left, John the Baptist and St. Andrew on the right, looking down from the very top of St. Peter's Basilica as the cardinals in this procession wearing the scarlet choir dress that recognizes the color of blood that they would happily shed for the church. Just as Pope Francis is dressed in the chasuble ready for the Mass, in the colour of the Passion of red, as he is escorted by his guard and the pallbearers. And in Psalm 114, I love the Lord, for he has heard my voice of appeal. He has turned his ear to me whenever I call. The choir sing the antiphon, I know that my Redeemer lives. On the last day I shall rise again. And Psalm 115, which includes the words, how precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death of his faithful. Your servant, Lord, am I, the son of your handmaid. You have loosened my bonds. I will offer a thanksgiving sacrifice. I will call on the name of the Lord. My vows to the Lord I will fulfill before all his people. Underneath the passage to the sacristy of the Basilica and into the square of the Roman martyrs. The great wall of this Vatican City close by at all times. Psalm 50 includes the words, have mercy on me, O God, according to your merciful love. according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash me completely from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. My sins, truly, I know them. My sin is always before me. The Pope is carried by the gentleman who looked after him in life, and he is followed immediately by the household who were with him, including, I can see, the young priest who was handing out rosaries to those who came up to the white vehicle that carried the Pope around the Easter assembly and celebrations. It is for all those who worked closely with him the profound loss not only of a Holy Father, but of their own father. The Pope is now conveyed underneath the great Tower of the Bells into St. Peter's Square, where an enormous congregation awaits to worship with this translation procession. Around the Pope's neck, the pallium made of white lamb's wool, which represented his authority as Pope. It's made from lamb's wool that was shorn from young lambs and woven with the black crosses attached, and is placed upon the chasuble with 3 silver nails to represent the nails that went through the hands and feet of Christ on the cross. Each of the palliums are kept beside St. Peter's tomb before they are conferred upon the recipient in their duty to the cross. I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. I will lift up mine eyes unto the mountains. From where shall come my help? My help shall come from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will keep your foot from stumbling. Your God will never slumber." This procession is being led by the priests of the Diocese of the Bishop of Rome. The priests who we saw just entering the Basilica there and leading this procession, who look after the churches all across Rome. And it is a reminder that priests all over the world of the Roman Catholic Church are represented by them, the ones who have the duty to be among the people, as Pope Francis did in Argentina as a young priest. And it was, in a sense, fighting against all the glory of this panoply that made Francis's pontificate so spectacularly different. And it is that which is marked by these priests, bishops, and cardinals.
Soli peccati, et malum horam te feci, exultamur Domino, ossa umiliata, odiosus invenialis in sententia tua,
The morning sun catching the smoke of the rising incense as the thurifiers carry the thuribles with the incense that will be used later to cense the body of Pope Francis when he's placed at the catafalque. So often the Pope would drive amongst those gathered here in worship He seems here to be taking leave of that duty as he returns to the great Basilica and into its great door. In the background, the great point of stone which looks up into the heavens, which was present in the Roman amphitheatre at the time St. Peter was crucified. St. Peter chose to be crucified upside down because he felt unworthy to be crucified as Jesus Christ had been. And that stone obelisk is kept at the centre of St. Peter's Square as the silent witness of that martyrdom. St. Peter, the first of the popes in the descent of St. Peter. And here we say goodbye to the most recent. Psalm 131. I will not enter the house where I dwell, nor go to the bed where I rest. I will give no sleep to my eyes. To my eyelids I will give no slumber, until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling for the strong one of Jacob. The choir will now sing the Litany of the Saints. After Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy, you will hear the names of all the saints read out and the reply, pray for him. The Pope passes through the door that he opened at the beginning of this Jubilee year on Christmas Eve of 2024. And it is this Jubilee year that he gave so much of his effort to achieving and leading, and which will continue in his absence, but with constant memory of his leadership as Holy Father.
Sancta Maria, ora pro Sancte Joseph, ora pro eo, Sancti Joachim et Anna, orate pro eo, omnes sancti patriarche et prophete, orate pro eo, Sancti Petre et Paule, orate pro eo, Sancte Andrea, ora pro eo, Sancti Ioannes et Jacobe, orate pro eo, Sancte Toma, ora pro eo, Sancti Philippe et Jacobe, orate pro eo, Sancte Bartolomeo, ora pro eo, Sancte Matteo, ora pro eo, Sancti Simon et Tadei, orate pro eo, Sancte Mattia, ora pro eo, Sancte Luca, ora pro eo, Sancte Marce, ora pro eo, Sancte Barnaba, ora pro eo, Sancti Timone e Melite, orate pro eo, Santa Maria Magdalena, ora pro eo, Sancti Marta Maria et Lazare, orate pro eo, omnes sancti discipuli Domini, orate pro eo, Sancte Clemens, ora pro eo, Sancte Calliste, ora pro eo, Sancte Pontiane, ora pro eo, Sancte Fabiane, ora pro eo, Sancte Corneli, ora pro eo, Sancte Xiste, ora pro eo, Sancte Silvestre, ora pro eo, Sancte Damase, ora pro eo, Sancte Ioannes, ora pro eo, Sancte Maria.
Beneath the Great Dome now, and in front of the massive baldacchino over the altar of the Confession, which itself sits above the believed resting place, the tomb of St. Peter himself. Pope Francis is placed as each of the saints are called to pray for him. The list of those saints who have given their lives and by their lives have given an example to all Christians being brought here by name to be with Pope Francis as he lies in his great basilica.
Sancte Ioannes Paule, ora pro eo, omnes sancti pontifices Romani, orate pro eo, Sancte Stefane, ora pro eo, Sancti protomartires Romane Ecclesiae, orate pro eo, Sancte Ignati Antiochene, ora pro eo, Sancte Policarpe,
Pope Francis wearing the papal mitre, the chasuble of scarlet, ready as he were to lead in the Mass with his rosary in his hands and his pallium around his neck, placed amongst the cardinals, the priests, and particularly those who looked after him throughout his period as Pope, and particularly during his illness more recently. Here at rest, with the saints still being summoned, with their Latin names, followed by Ora pro eo. Pray for him.
Perpetua et felicitas, ora de pro Santa Sabina, ora pro Santa Agata, ora pro Santa Agnes, ora pro Santa Cecilia, ora pro Santa Eugenia, ora pro.
Underneath that great window is held the chair of St. Peter, which Pope Francis asked to be taken from that great altar frontal down and brought amongst the people at the start of his synod on synodality. A change and a move that demonstrated the power and import of the Roman pontiff as the descendant of St. Peter.
Basilica et Gregori Nazianzene, ora te pro Sancte Ioannes Chrysostome, ora pro Sancte Martine Turonensis, ora pro Sancte Patrici, ora pro Sancti Cyrille et Methodi, ora de pro Sancte Bernarde, ora pro Sancte Antoni de Padova, ora pro Sancte Bonaventura, ora pro Sancte Toma de Aquino, Sancte Carole, ora pro Sancte Ioannes a Cruce, ora pro Sancte Francisce de Sales, ora pro Sancte Alphonse Marie, ora pro.
And there are the staff who looked after the Pope and who were with him on Easter Sunday as he played his part in the celebration of the Mass.
Santa Teresia a Jesu Infante, ora pro Sancte Antoni, Sancte Francisce, ora pro eum, Sancte Aloisi, ora pro eum, Sancte Filippe, ora pro eum, Sancte Vincenti, ora pro eum, Sancte Ioannes Baptista, ora pro eum, Sancte Gaspar, ora pro eum, Sancte Vincenti, ora pro eum, Sancte Ioannes Maria, ora pro eum, Sancte Ioannes, ora pro eum, Sancte Pie de Pietrelcina, ora pro eum, Sancta Scholastica, ora pro eum, Sancta Clara, ora pro eum, Sancta Birgitta, ora pro eum, Sancta Francisca Romana, ora pro eum, Santa Rosa de Lima, ora pro eum, Sancte Ludovice, ora pro eum, Santa Monica, ora pro eum, Santa Paula, ora pro eum, Santa Marcella, ora pro eum, Santa Elisabeth Ungarie, ora pro eum, omnes sancti et sancte Dei, orate pro eum.
The Litany of the Saints is concluded, and the service now moves forward to the continuation of this preparation for the Liturgy of the Word.
Apostolos visisti, miserere, qui sedes ad exteram Patris, miserere, qui venturus es judicare vivos et mortuos, miserere.
And there the calling of Christ also to be here at this moment. And we move now into the next stage. Be merciful to us sinners. Deliver from eternal damnation our souls and those of our brethren, loved ones and benefactors. Grant eternal rest to the faithful departed. Keep the world from pestilence, famine, and war. Bring all peoples together in peace and true harmony.
Ab aeterna damnatione eripias, erogamus audiros, ut omnibus fidelibus defunctis, requiem aeternam donare digneris, erogamus audiros, ut mundum a peste fame et bello servare digneris, erogamus audiros, ut cum multis populis pacem et veram concordiam donare digneris. Te rogamus audi nos, ut ecclesiam tuam sanctam regere et conservare digneris.
Govern and protect your holy church. Keep all the ordained in faithful service to your church. Send laborers into your harvest. Bestow unity upon all who believe in Christ. Lead all people to the light of the gospel.
Credentibus unicatem largiri digneris, te rogamus audi nos, ut omnes homines ad evangelii lumen perducere digneris, te rogamus audi nos, Christe audi nos, Christe audi nos, Christe audi nos, Christe audi nos.
The Camerlengo, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, will now sprinkle the Holy Father with water and also cense his body here in St. Peter's, starting with the thurible, which he will fill with incense. And the purpose of this is to raise prayers up and to purify this place of worship. The holy water. And remembering that in Christianity it is with water that baptism begins, the journey of life, and Christians seek to always remember their baptism. Christ was baptized by St. John the Baptist in the River Jordan, and at death, baptism is remembered. And the purification of the body with the incense, a reminder that at Christ's birth, one of the gifts brought by the three wise men was incense for purification. And the idea is that as the smoke rises to the heavens, and it certainly can under this great dome of the Basilica, it carries with it the prayers of the faithful. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. Receive his soul and present him to God, the Most High. We now have the reading of the Gospel. The Gospel comes from that part of the Bible that describes the life of Christ and tells the story of Jesus, and will first be introduced with the words, "Follow ut ubi ego sum, et illi sint mecum." I desire that they may also be with me where I am. The celebrant has once again provided incense for the thurible, and the deacon comes forward with the gospel itself, which is blessed by the celebrant, so that the deacon, with his permission, may now read it to the faithful. And because the word of God is to be used, the celebrant has removed his mitre and stands. The veneration for the Bible is at the heart of the Christian faith and reminds us that Pope Francis, in his leadership of the Roman Catholic Church from this great basilica, used the Word of God at all times, and it is the foundation stone, the Word, on which St. Peter, the first in the line of popes here in Rome, used as the foundation stone for Christ's church. First of all, the deacon will cense with the thurible and incense the Bible.
Dominus vobiscum. Lectio Sancti Evangelii secundum Ioannem. Gloria tibi, Domine. In illo tempore, sublevatis oculis in celum, oravit Iesus dicens.
At that time, Jesus lifted up his eyes to heaven and praying said, "Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you have given me because you loved me before the foundation of the world." O righteous Father, even though the world does not know me, I know you, and these know you that have sent me. I made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known, that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. It's 9 o'clock. You're watching Sky News as we cover the translation of Pope Francis to the Basilica of St. Peter. The procession will now return to the altar. And it is a chance for the intercessions which will be led by the celebrant. Brothers and sisters, let us pray to God our Father that he may welcome our departed shepherd to his eternal home and increase our faith in the resurrection of the dead. Let us pray to the Lord. Lord, hear our prayer.
Per il defunto Papa Francesco, perché il principe dei pastori,
for the late Pope Francis, that the chief shepherd, who eternally lives to intercede for us, may welcome him into the kingdom of light and peace. For the Holy Church of God, that in fidelity to her mandate, she may be in Christ a leaven of renewal in our human family. For every people and nation, that in the pursuit of justice they may dwell in peace as one family, united by fraternal affection. For all of us gathered here in prayer, that we may one day be reunited in the kingdom of heaven. And now will be sung the Lord's Prayer in Latin. God, our salvation, hear us as we pray in union with all the saints, and welcome into the assembly of your elect the soul of your servant, our Pope Francis, who placed his trust in the Church's prayer, through Christ our Lord.
Per Christum Dominum nostrum. Requiem aeternam done.
Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. May he rest in peace. Amen. Cardinal Kevin Farrell completing there the liturgy of the Word. That has marked this translation of Pope Francis from the chapel of his home here to the Basilica in St. Peter's, Rome. With the antiphon to Maria, the Holy Mother of the Church, the words of which are, "Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy. Hail our life, our sweetness and our hope. To thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. Turn then, most gracious advocate, thine eyes of mercy towards us, and after this our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus. O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. The ceremony is now concluded, and the celebrant and all those here will now take leave of this great altar of the Confession of St. Peter and leave the mortal remains of Pope Francis lying in state at the heart of this great basilica and beneath its massive dome that is so much the part of the Roman skyline. And it is here that Pope Francis will lie in state, visited by those who come in their number, until Saturday morning, when all will regather here for the liturgy of his Requiem Mass. And at the end of that Requiem Mass, he will be brought back into St. Peter's before he is conveyed for entombment to the Basilica Santa Maria Maggiore, which is a short distance to the east of the Vatican City. But there again, the staff who looked after him, particularly, you may have noticed the nuns too, who daily prepared his food and made sure that he was ready for each day of his pontificate. And under the glory of this great cathedral, with its art proclaiming the glory of God, rests the mortal remains of Pope Francis, who has done his duty.
Pope Francis now at rest then in St. Peter's Basilica, the largest place of worship in all of Christianity, the focal point for the Catholic Church, whose followers now mourn their father. For a pope who urged his priests to look outwards, the invitation now for pilgrims to pay their respects and give thanks will be an important part of the ceremony of his death. The bells had rung out across St. Peter's Square, cocooning those pilgrims in the colonnades. On screens, the followers managed to see and hear the service for Pope Francis, his coffin of wood and zinc resting below the high altar of the Basilica, known as the Altar of the Confession, below which lies the burial site, the tomb of St. Peter, a building which dominates the skyline of the eternal city of Rome, a building which took 120 years and 20 popes to build. Now for the next 3 days, those who will travel from this city, from across Italy, from across the world, will be able to pay their respects to Pope Francis, who rests there at ground level at his request. Our correspondent Lisa Holland has been amongst those crowds, those waiting to make their way into St. Peter's. Lisa.
Well, Anna, here in St. Peter's Square for just over an hour, the regular hustle and bustle of the square was broken and replaced by a sombre, respectful silence as people leant against barriers, trying to get a glimpse of events and the first of those movements of Pope Francis during this period of mourning. We saw people with tears in their eyes, people reflecting on what the Pope meant to them, and others making their way towards the areas where they queue now for that opportunity to go inside St. Peter's Basilica and pay their personal respects. Now, one of the people who was in the square joins me now is David Statz. You're here from Minnesota in the United States. You're a Catholic, a young Catholic, here with your mum and family. What did it mean to you to just be seeing history unfold in front of your eyes over the course of the last hour?
Yeah, it was really something special to see. Me personally, I've never been to Italy, never been to the Vatican, so to come here for the first time and just have something like this big happen, it's just really powerful, and it's so cool to see personally. So.
And what does Pope Francis mean to you? What did Pope Francis mean to you as a spiritual leader and part of the Catholic Church, you as part of the Catholic Church in America?
It was always just, the Pope is the leader of the Church, and he's just our father and just a very good symbol and just a director of kind of what it means to be Catholic, and kind of always just looking to the head of the Church. When we think of the head of the Church, we look here and we think of Rome, and we just kind of look to examples. So being here for his death is obviously a somber, but then it's also kind of looking to that and feeling excitement to what is to come after. So.
No, I know that you actually had planned your visit because you were coming to a scheduled canonisation of a young millennial, Carlo Acutis, from the UK, actually, which has now been cancelled. Tell us about that as well.
Yeah, so my friends invited me out here to come see the canonization of Carlos Acutis, and when we were driving on the way down to the airport, we just found out the Pope had passed away. So kind of it changed our schedule a bit, but it was just in a good way too, because it did give us the opportunity to be here, to see all this, and it's sad that we won't be able to see his canonization, but then also it's a really cool thing to be here to witness this historical event.
And Rome, the head of the Catholic Church, the seat of the Catholic Church, you say you'd never been to Italy before. Is it kind of everything you thought it would be?
It's a lot different than what I thought it was going to be. I feel like a lot of people always say the Vatican City is the smallest country in the world. It is, obviously the smallest, but it does feel just ginormous in size. You feel very small here, but then also kind of just feels a lot different than what I thought. You'd think it'd be kind of this really holy, reverent. There's a lot of people just out here just walking mindlessly, so it is kind of cool just to be out here. Almost feels kind of like a tourist place, but it's hard to remind yourself that this is the head of the Catholic Church here. So.
And a big question, really, I suppose, for a day like today, but we are in this period of transition for the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church is growing, but growing only in certain parts of the world. What would you want from the next Pope to appeal to young Catholics moving forward?
Yeah, I kind of think we can't have a repeat. You don't need a repeat of any other Pope, so we don't need another Pope Francis, we don't need another Pope John Paul. We need a new, separate. So, but just to cardinals who are electing, fearlessness and courage in this age, because the media and all this different distractions of what our life is becoming, you just need someone who is not going with the flow of the majority, just someone who is willing to stand up to their beliefs and faith when others persecute them for it. So.
Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So Dave, just one of the people here, just come to soak up the atmosphere, pay their respects, and I just want to give you a sense of the crowds here. I mean, even since the end of the transfer of the body of Pope Francis, this section of St. Peter's Square has opened up, and you can see now literally the length and the breadth of these enormous queues. I mean, we'll learn numbers later today, but you can see now people with their umbrellas because it is getting quite warm, and just queuing, snaking round now to try and get into and have an opportunity to pay their respects to Pope Francis now that the period of mourning and his lying in state has begun. And of course, doing something like that, it means something different to so many people, doesn't it? And just a couple of hours ago, before the Pope's body was transferred from the Santa Marta guest house, we also met a group of 3 people who had come together because they were making an Easter pilgrimage, and they landed on Monday and then looked at their phones and realised that the Pope had passed away. So they were actually due to have an audience with the Pope today, and instead they're queuing to pay their respects to Pope Francis. But to try and summarise what a lot of people are saying down here is they have come because they want to say thank you to Pope Francis and all that he meant to them.
Lisa, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. And certainly previous years, and I know Barbara Sarah, who's here with me now, we were both here for the death and the funeral of Pope John Paul II, and we saw the crowds, hundreds, thousands of people queuing down the Via della Conciliazione. I think I'm right in saying it was Mussolini who decided that the entrance to St. Peter's Basilica needed to be majestic, and it leads through the square, right through the altar. The pictures we're watching now as those cardinals pay their own respects. We know that about 60 of them had arrived or were in Rome already for the first general congregation. More will be flying in too, and they are themselves and the archbishops beginning to say their personal goodbye and their thank you to Pope Francis.
Absolutely, and a very, very touching service that we've just seen. It's interesting that you use the word majestic because, of course, it is, and none of it, by mistake. St. Peter's Basilica is meant to be imposing and majestic in the Via della Conciliazione, and in a sense, that is exactly what Pope Francis wasn't trying to fight against necessarily, but he was trying to, get back to the roots and get back to the faithful. You mentioned that, when Pope John Paul died, I think the estimate is about 2.5 to maybe even 3 million people gathered here. So we'll have to see what the numbers will be. But whatever they are, it's going to be a tiny, tiny fraction of the 1.4 billion Catholics around the world, many of whom I think will just have been watching this as we, as people have been on television and also will be watching the funeral on television. And that, I think, is the importance of this very solemn service, which also is very familiar. So at one point when holy water was sprinkled on the body of the Pope and incense as well. A lot of priests will have done that to their congregation just on Easter Sunday. So it's the grandness of it, but also the familiarity, I think, for so many Catholics, 1.4 billion, many of whom will be watching. And it's interesting looking at the details of the images that we're seeing here, the practice of what the Pope wanted. He said he wanted a simpler funeral. Well, we can see the coffin there. First of all, we know it's a simpler coffin, wood and zinc. But crucially, what really strikes me is that the coffin is at floor level. 20 years ago, I did actually manage to get into St. Peter's Basilica and walk past the body of Pope John Paul II, and it was on an elevated platform, a catafalque. And it did make a difference, not necessarily in a negative way, but I think it will strike people now, the thousands that will walk past, as different, that it's at floor level, that they can actually look at the Pope as he lies there in state.
And these were part of his final wishes, this idea of simplicity, of humility, of not being buried at the Vatican, not residing in the papal apartment, choosing to live in the guest house where he had come to vote for the replacement to Benedict, it became him, of course, did it not? And he chose to stay in that guest house because it was simpler. And that is how he chose to continue his papacy.
I mean, so symbolic, that choice of his entire papacy and what he wanted to achieve and the reason for choosing the name Francis. You know, what we've just seen now almost felt like a handover, because he had been in the chapel of the Santa Marta residence where he lived, a chapel he would have prayed in on his own many, many times. And he was surrounded there by the papal household, a lot of the medics, a lot of people that had been with him throughout his papacy and certainly through the last months and weeks of his illness. Whereas now what we see is the Pope lying in state for everybody. Whereas before it was the people in his inner circle or Vatican residents who could have paid their respects. Now it is open to anyone who is here in Rome.
And an overwhelming experience entering St. Peter's Basilica. It is supposed to be on the site of the tomb of St. Peter. Michelangelo, these are the names that are included here, highly regarded as the Basilica's principal designer. The artist Raphael also involved. It is an experience in itself, so dominant, so dominating of the Rome skyline. For those who have been waiting, they go to see Pope Francis and they're bathed in the extraordinariness of the building behind us.
It is. It's an extraordinary building. It's an extraordinary square as well outside. And remember that every Sunday, anyone who is in Rome and is faithful will probably go and listen to the Pope do, read the Angelus during the Mass. So absolutely, it will be. And I think the atmosphere in the square, we were hearing that a little bit from Lisa Holland, will be incredible because, again, I always hark back to 20 years ago. People waited for up to 12 hours to get in.
So the faithful, those involved in the church, Pope Francis himself, a Jesuit, their buildings are literally just behind us, in fact, and there was a missionary message, really, which came with that. This idea that you needed to speak outside the church, and that certainly spoke of the travels that we saw, the pontiff. We spoke to a young man from Argentina who had been to the Philippines with him, for example. But he chose to go to Iraq, to Abu Dhabi, to take the Catholic Church outside of itself as well and have an interfaith message.
Absolutely, he worked at that very hard, and actually we heard from the Grand Imam al-Tayyib, who we had met on a trip, I think, around the trip to Abu Dhabi. He's one of the leading figures of Sunni Islam that's also sent condolences over the Pope's death. So very much in the spirit of him being a Jesuit, this almost missionary message, and very much always linking it back to ordinary people. We've seen the grandeur of St. Peter's Square. The ceremony has been incredibly solemn and very, very touching. We could actually even hear the bells from where we are and some of the singing as well. But Pope Francis, at the heart of his message was the church has to reach out to the weakest and meekest in the world and be present for them.
Yes, those bells that ring out for those special occasions for the Catholic faith, the Urbi et Orbi at Easter, and at Christmas as well, ringing out in the square. Listen to Lisa Holland by those who have gathered already, queuing no doubt to make their way into the Basilica a little later.
Yes, and the numbers, of course, are swelling here all the time, Anna. And people have extraordinary stories and extraordinary reasons for being here. And you see an ordinary person in a pair of shorts, and you kind of assume perhaps they're just on holiday and they were here at this time. And then you scratch beneath the surface and they have an amazing story in that just the young man that we were talking to 10 minutes or so ago. An extraordinary thing that someone had come from the United States to witness the canonization of a young man from London who had leukemia, Carlo Acutis, someone that they didn't know but that they felt so spiritually drawn to. Now, of course, that canonization has been cancelled, but I think that journey just gives you a sort of sense of the devotion and the spiritual guidance that people are taking from this seat of the Catholic Church, and that, of course, is a reason why so many people feel that they really need to be here at at this time, whether it is as a Catholic who's come from some other part of Italy. I was talking to a woman this morning who had got on her bicycle and cycled a really large distance so that she could be here today and just be in the square. And whether it's just being in the square or whether it's actually queuing to try to go and personally pay your respects to Pope Francis lying in state, these are people making huge strides just to be part of the passing of Pope Francis, and other people saying that they were coming for an audience with the Pope and that got cancelled, but just that they feel that it's so important to them to be here right now and to say thank you to Pope Francis for his spiritual guidance. That there's so much of a sense of mourning, of transition, of grief, of curiosity about the future, and some people kind of looking to what the next page in the story of the Catholic Church will be, and others just want to be part of history. But yes, so many people here, and to just kind of show you the queues now, we think these are people just literally trying to put up their umbrellas, get a little bit of shade from what is actually quite a warm sun now towards the end of April. And just being here in the square, actually, it's a warm day now, but it's just in stark contrast to when this latest health journey for Pope Francis began in early February, when he had a cold, then a respiratory tract infection. And he was here out on a wet day in February, which started his decline for ill health with the double pneumonia. It's been a difficult time for followers of the Catholic Church, seeing Pope Francis be so ill over these last few months. So now a sense of peace that they can be with him to pay their respects.
Lisa Holland, live for us there amongst those crowds in St. Peter's Square, those patiently now waiting for the doors to open of St. Peter's Basilica. That is due in about 35 minutes' time. We will, of course, continue our coverage after this short break.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armoury.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way. They are pushing forward, trying to get people to disperse.
What Prince Harry wanted to do was to eject me.
Is that your opinion?
It is. It is.
They were serious, coordinated attacks.
It's an entire generation that will have to contend with the horrifying impacts of this conflict.
The number of patients is increasing.
It's been quite some day.
Hey, what country are you
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country?
You've gone viral.
I've ever had such a reaction.
It's just incredible.
Since the Oval Office meeting, have they reached out to you?
If Ukraine asks for help and its allies decide to help, then that's the end of it.
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today. Beth Rigby from Sky.
You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
There could be some more painful decisions to come.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. Pope Francis' body has been taken to St. Peter's Basilica, where it will lie in state, and the faithful will be able to pay their respects. We're going to continue to monitor that unfolding situation for you, and we'll be back out live throughout the day here on Sky News. As you know, Anna and the team there in position just by Vatican City in Rome for us. But we want to get you up to speed now on all of the day's other news. And first of all, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has pulled out of talks on how to end the war in Ukraine that he was due to host in London this morning. In the past hour, we've heard from the US Vice President, J.D. Vance.
The Ukrainians and the Russians are both going to have to give up some of the territory they currently own. There's going to have to be some territorial swaps. So I wouldn't say the exact lines, but we want the killing to stop. And the only way to really stop the killing is for the armies to both put down their weapons, to freeze this thing, and to get on with the business of actually building a better Russia and a better Ukraine. We're certainly invested in that effort. We hope the Russians and the Ukrainians will meet us halfway.
Let's bring in our Moscow correspondent, Ivor Bennett. Ivor, is this latest kind of breakdown in talks that was meant to include Secretary Rubio, meant to include Foreign Secretary David Lammy, is it kind of seen in Russia as more of the same or as an extra kind of bonus, as it were, to the kind of Moscow angle in all of this?
We haven't heard from Moscow yet this morning on the apparent breakdown on these talks, but I think we can predict that they might be, well, slightly pleased. Apparently, the apparent failure from the Europeans and Americans to agree a position there. I think that they might feel that strengthens their hand, with Steve Witkoff due in Moscow later this week, we understand, to meet Vladimir Putin, which will be his fourth meeting with Vladimir Putin. And I think the fact that these talks are not going ahead at the level they were supposed to is indicative of just how far there is to go before we reach a real breakthrough in the peace process. So the talks were supposed to be between the top diplomats from America, European countries including the UK and Ukraine, but Secretary of State Marco Rubio pulled out last night, David Lammy then as well, along with all the other key players. So they are taking place, but at a much lower level. And I think that tells us a lot about the current state of play in the negotiations. So the aim of the talks was supposed to be to agree a joint position between Washington, London, Europe, and Kiev, but it seems that is proving very difficult indeed, with it's understood because of Washington's demand or proposals are seemingly just unacceptable for Kiev. They reportedly include recognition of Russia's illegal annexation for Crimea, which is a non-starter for Ukraine. The Europeans, I think, would struggle, to say the least, to get on board with that. Other sticking points too, including Moscow's demands for some sanctions relief before negotiations are concluded. That too is just a non-starter for Europe. So although Donald Trump has said that he wants to get a peace deal done by the end of this week, I think this is looking less and less likely. And I think in J.D. Vance's comments there that you played just before coming to me, I think you could detect a bit of frustration from the American side there at the lack of progress. And these talks in London, it appears, are the latest kind of stumbling block there.
Ivor, as always, thanks so much. Ivor Bennett there for us in Moscow. Right, let's get you up to date on all of the day's domestic politics. In a moment, we'll talk to Mari about the ongoing row following the Supreme Court decision last week, ahead, of course, of PMQs at midday. But Sam's also here, as you can see, our deputy political editor, with more on the story you brought us exclusively this morning, which revealed what exactly did Robert Jenrick say in your exclusive clip, and what's the update on it?
So Robert Jenrick, Shadow Justice Secretary, the person who came number 2 in last year's leadership contest, really starting a discussion inside the Conservative Party about what to do if they cannot defeat reform. At the moment, he says his job is to try and effectively get rid of them as a political rival on the right of British politics. But in a leaked recording that was passed to Sky News, he raises the question about what happens if we start to approach the next general election, and that hasn't happened. Let's listen to what he said.
My worry is that they become a kind of permanent or semi-permanent fixture on the British political scene. And if that is the case, and I say, I have tried to do everything I can to stop that being the case, then life becomes a lot harder for us, because the right is not united. You head towards a general election where the nightmare scenario is that Keir Starmer sails in through the middle as a result result of the two parties being disunited. I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared for that to happen. I want the right to be united. And so one way or another, I'm determined to do that, and to bring this coalition together and make sure that we can these elections.
Now, the reason that record is quite hard to hear was because it was at a dinner with students that was recorded Robert Jenrick's comments. So they were comments done not on a television station or in a public speech. These are things that perhaps he was more comfortable saying in private. Where he's in line with the Tory leadership is that at the moment he says that the job of the Tory party is to destroy reform. Well, Wilf, this morning's Sky News poll suggests that Reform are 5 percentage points ahead of the Tories. But where I think it's significant, and he departs from Kemi Badenoch's line, was the bit where he started saying, if we approach the general election and it looks as if the two parties are fighting each other rather than Labour, I will do something about that. He makes it quite clear that is not a situation that can be sustained. He doesn't set out what should happen. He doesn't say, I want a pact. But he leaves open, quite deliberately, the fact that he thinks something more might need to be done, which is not a message that will go down badly in parts of the Tory party.
No, but one also does wonder, I mean, the extent to which this is a sort of a line that will get him in trouble or not, is whether that point of view, i.e. if we're 6 months out for an election, which is obviously a moment we're not that close to anytime soon, whether every single member of the Tory party, including the leader, would agree with that sort of rough sentiment. Doesn't, of course, answer how you'd solve that problem.
Quite right. I mean, the problem is that Kemi Badenoch has sort of set her face against this. It's quite interesting looking at the political reaction. The Liberal Democrats have basically called for Robert Jenrick to be sacked. The Labour Party are saying that Kemi Badenoch should challenge Robert Jenrick over these remarks. But I'd say there's a more interesting conversation going on here. It's pretty existential at the moment if you're inside the Conservative Party and you're trying to work out whether Reform UK is effectively going to completely eat your breakfast and either hand Labour the next general election or maybe even do well themselves. They're all discussing what to do. It's just that the leader takes quite a hardline, narrow position, whilst there are some, even at her very top table, who want to have a more expansive discussion, a what-if discussion that probably won't go down well with Kemi Badenoch.
Albeit, again, I don't know, Mario, what your view is of this. Presumably, publicly, the leader has to take a position so many years out, not to say, oh, we're considering a merger or some kind of supply and agreement ahead of an election. It's an interesting one. Even if you're thinking it, the leader can't say it yet. But I guess Jenrick is playing with fire a little bit on internal politics.
I mean, Jenrick's been playing with fire quite a bit in the past few months. There's been so many moments, I think, in the past 6 months where people have felt that maybe he's slightly overstepped the mark or overrun from his brief into other things. But I think, nonetheless, there is enough time for the Tories to brainstorm several different game plans ahead of a general election. This isn't about the local elections. This is very much about the general election. And Sam was right that, for now, they are going to want to perhaps just keep that just a tiny crack open for now.
Sam, what have Reform said? Anything here?
We're hearing from them very shortly. You say Kemi Badenoch's got to keep a tough line. Well, it was 2 weeks ago that she said, look, at a local level, after these local elections, it could be the situation that the Tories and Reform have to work together to keep a left-wing local government out of city halls all around the country. So I think everybody's capable of playing footsie. Her pitch for the leadership was that she would take a hard line on this. Robert Jenrick's pitch for the leadership was that he wouldn't. At the moment, there's not a leadership contest. Join the dots.
But in the leadership, Jenrick did rule out a deal with Reform.
His language was and is and has been quite a lot softer.
Interesting. Sam, great stuff as always. Thanks so much for that. We're going to continue the discussion on domestic politics here, Mario and I, and following the Supreme Court's ruling that a woman in the UK law refers to biological sex, I spoke to the Home Office Minister, Dame Diana Johnson, about last week's Supreme Court decision.
As a woman, I'm not particularly interested in what men think or feel about issues around women's rights. What I'm interested in is the law. And what's really helpful from that Supreme Court judgment last week is the clarity it provides. And I think following the law is absolutely the right thing to do, and that's why I welcome what the Prime Minister has said about that is the law of the land, and that's that's now where we move forward.
You can criticise me, you can say my view is irrelevant or you like as a man.
I'm not personalising this,
but
I'm
you
just
are.
saying...
You're personalising it as it relates to the Prime Minister. He's the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Whether he's a man or woman is irrelevant.
Well, actually,
his view is critically important on all topics.
It is, absolutely.
Just to say because he's a man, we can excuse his error here.
No, I'm not saying that.
That is what you say.
No, I'm saying that what I'm interested in is what the law of the land actually says. And the law of the land,
and you've
very clear
acknowledged
last
that the
week.
Prime Minister got this wrong. Can he move forward without acknowledging that?
I think there's been confusion about this, and that's why the case went to the Supreme Court. We know what happened in Scotland. We know that there was the need to get clarity, and that's why it went to the Supreme Court. So I think recognising that is quite important, and having that judgment from the Supreme Court, I think, is really helpful to the Prime Minister, to me as the policing minister, to the government, to the NHS, to policing. I think this is really important and helpful.
You know, Murray, that was a clip towards the end of the interview, and I think it kind of speaks for itself, whether she was trying to make it about me personally or the Prime Minister. I thought it was an interesting line of pushback. But what we missed from that clip was that at the open of the interview, she acknowledged the Prime Minister had been wrong.
Yeah.
Now, the Prime Minister himself has not acknowledged that yet. The next question is whether he should apologise for the impact his words in the past have had on the huge consequences of this debate, and that remains to be seen. But it's interesting that you can acknowledge that the Prime Minister was wrong in the past and then just try and gloss over things and move on this issue. It'd be interesting to see if that's the tact he tries to stick to in PMQs today.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty is it's not going to hold. Clearly, it's not holding. We have a situation where Diana Johnson was in that interview with yourself trying to say, essentially, there's nothing to see here, the PM was wrong, but let's not talk about it. And that doesn't make any sense. And the thing, if people are watching at home thinking, well, why do we care about this? This speaks to political integrity. So when MPs or prime ministers or political parties change their position on something, mostly it's quite helpful just to be honest that you've changed your position on something. And by trying to pretend that your position has always been the same, you risk undermining your own political integrity. So Diana Johnson, one of those lines she said in the interview with yourself, she said that that has always been Labour Party position, that they have always protected and been pro-protecting single-sex spaces. Now, we know that that's not really true because there are a plethora of examples. But, for instance, there is a historic Times Radio interview with Bridget Phillipson, who is now the Women and Equalities Minister, where she explicitly says that trans women should use female toilets. That, therefore, is not protecting a single-sex space in the way that we talk about it today. So there are examples in which clearly the position has changed, and the longer they take this line to take, which is nothing has changed, the more they are going to have difficult interviews like that we just saw, where clearly there is a discord between reality and rhetoric.
There's also, I mean, you're saying there's a matter of integrity here. There's also just a question of leadership.
Yeah.
You know, the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister. We don't expect him to need clarity on this topic of all topics from the top court in land, particularly when he is a legal expert himself. And again, to just sort of sit there and as if we should all think, yeah, of course, now that someone else has answered the question for you, we can all move on. That's not what people want from leaders. They want leadership. And again, it's quite an odd sort of defence to take because it kind of is rather a sort of weak one.
Well, the most extraordinary moment was when she was quite defensive and basically said, I don't care what men think or feel about women's rights. And that was a defence to a question that she didn't want to answer. And therefore, she decided the best way to do that would be to attack you as a man and the Prime Minister as a man. That makes absolutely no sense. We are talking about national policy, and therefore men and women will always have views on national policy. That is how politics works. Our Prime Minister is a man. Therefore, we have to care what he thinks about this. It doesn't make any sense.
It's also a debate around gender.
Yeah.
So to weaponise that part of it...
It makes no sense.
I think was interesting, and people can make their own judgment about exactly what she meant by that comment by watching it back. Mari, great stuff as always, and it's going to be a pretty good PMQ today, I think. And, of course, we'll have it for everyone live here on Sky News, as always, midday. Now, some of this morning's other top stories. Talks aimed at ending the long-running bin strike in Birmingham will resume later. Bin workers from the Unite Union have been striking since March in a row over pay and jobs. The government has called on both sides to negotiate a deal. Elon Musk says his time spent working with Donald Trump's administration will drop significantly next month as his car company deals with falling sales. The billionaire businessman, who was put in charge of cutting federal government costs, says he'll allocate more time to Tesla. A wildfire in Ocean County, New Jersey, has forced the closure of a stretch of a major highway. Authorities say that around 3,000 people have been told to evacuate and that more than 1,300 structures were threatened. There have been no reports of injuries so far. The Chancellor has arrived in Washington for talks with her US counterpart and other finance ministers at the International Monetary Fund's spring gathering. Rachel Reeves is under pressure to secure a trade deal, a mission more urgent now that the UK's growth forecast has been downgraded. Our business and economics correspondent Gurpreet Nawan is there and sent this report.
Spring in DC. And a rude awakening for the world's finance ministers and central bankers gathered here at the IMF to hear its latest verdict on global growth. Back in the autumn, everyone was wondering if Donald Trump could take the election. The seasons have changed. Now they're wondering how much damage he could do. The verdict from the IMF's economists is sobering.
Now, while global growth remains well above recession levels, all regions are negatively impacted this year and next. Tensions will greatly impact global trade.
High up on the list, the obvious victims, like the US, China and Mexico. But the UK too, which had its growth forecast slashed by a third.
You've downgraded the UK's growth forecasts quite sharply and given a range of explanations from higher tariff barriers to more domestic issues like cost of living pressures. Out of those, so the global challenges versus the domestic challenges, which one is weighing more heavily on the UK's growth forecasts?
In terms of the 0.5 percentage point downward revision that we're seeing for the UK, the domestic factors are probably the biggest ones. And in particular, there is a lower carryover from weaker growth in the second half of last year. There is also some tightening of financial conditions as interest rates have risen.
So the economists here at the IMF have just given their take, and it was an important reminder that the UK actually has other things to worry about beyond tariffs. Yes, they're unleashing turmoil on the global economy, but in Britain, it's actually things like rising energy bills that have the potential to cause more damage.
A reminder that economies already have existing issues to deal with. In the US, recent high economic growth may insulate businesses from a full-blown recession. But inflation is an old problem, and it's about to get a lot worse. And never is that more obvious than at lunchtime.
So we're in Eastern Market in Capitol Hill. It's just celebrated its 150th birthday. And while 2 centuries ago, much of the stuff here would have been grown in America, if we look around now, a lot of the stuff's actually imported. We've got some dates over there that definitely weren't grown in America. We've got dried pasta from Italy, Parma ham from Spain, and over there, some cheddar from the UK. US customers have global tastes, and some of them will begrudgingly pay the price for the stuff they value.
For this one, last week, the lady, he always ordering for me, he told me she's go up.
At Canali's Deli, customers know nothing compares to the Spanish cured meats. Rosemary, who runs the business with her son, has already had to put up prices in recent years. She doesn't know how much more customers will absorb.
Are you worried about the impact this is going to have on your business?
How the people want to pay, maybe in this month, in 2 months, 3 months, I don't know.
But in that time, businesses might put off decisions or stall investment. For the global economy, it's not just tariffs, but the uncertainty that can kill you too.
And we're going to have much more of the IMF gathering in Washington. Gurpreet's there for us over the next couple of days and will be keeping us up to speed on Sky News. And as we mentioned a little earlier, PMQs at midday live also. But for now, we're going to get back out to Rome and over to Anna.
Wilfred, thank you very much indeed. And we are just minutes away now from when the doors of the great Basilica behind me, St. Peter's, are open to allow the crowds who have massed to start entering the Basilica to view the body of Pope Francis. He has been moved to St. Peter's Basilica earlier from the chapel where he lay at rest. The procession, called a translation, moved across the square of Santa Marta and entered into the square of St. Peter's before going into the Basilica where cardinals, bishops, archbishops paid their respects. Soon it will be members of the public who will be allowed in to do the same. And Barbara Sarah, my colleague, is here with me. The crowds have been gathering. We could hear the service actually played out in the square, so they know what's happened inside. The bells tolling behind us, it echoes through your body, does it not? And a quite simply beautiful transition, or translation as it's known, from the chapel into the Basilica behind us.
It's interesting because the actual name for this process is the translation. So when the coffin was taken from the residence of Santa Marta, the chapel where he'd been lying in state, but really just for people close to him, Vatican residents and the papal household. So the process of moving the body is called the translation, moving it into St. Peter's Basilica. But it did feel like a transition, like the private aspect of the mourning, where the people close to him, the medics that had helped him, you know, perhaps his family, we know that parts of his family live here in northern Italy. The papal household would have paid their respects, but now the Pope really is in St. Peter's Basilica, and we're going to see, we're already seeing the crowds gather. Has to be said, it's a very hot day. It's getting hotter, isn't it, in Rome? And back when Pope John Paul II lay in state, there were queues of up to 12 hours. And so there's already some ambulances on standby just to see. I mean, nothing is wrong now, but of course people won't have been queuing that long. There were people that queued overnight as well 20 years ago. So it's going to be, you know, the queuing will be a challenge for some, but I think very determined people here, the faithful here, that want to see Pope Francis one last time.
And at 10 o'clock, when the doors open, they enter the utterly resplendent St. Peter's Basilica. But there in front of them, below the altar, will be Pope Francis in a single coffin, not the typical three, and on the floor, not in a catafalque. So these are the changes that he has insisted upon.
I think during his papacy, it was always the balance that he was trying to strike, because I think the word majestic is the one that comes to mind. If we've just seen the service, if you walk into St. Peter's Basilica, or even outside here, Via della Conciliazione in St. Peter's Square. And I think the Pope realized that you need that, you know. Remember that the people gathered here in Rome will be a tiny, tiny fraction of the 1.4 billion Catholics that will have watched this on television, or we see pictures. So you need, I suppose, that kind of majesty to make sure that the message really does cut through and goes across the world, as the Catholics are all over the world. And so I think Pope Francis realized the importance of that and of the liturgy and you know, and following tradition, but at the same time he wanted a more simple service. He wanted a more simple funeral. I mean, you mentioned the fact that the coffin is on the floor. It's a floor level. That's pretty unheard of, and I think it will make a big difference for the people that are actually walking and filing past. I managed to get in 20 years ago, and I remember actually people walk by quite quickly because there's a lot of people that need to get through, but I think the level of the coffin will make a big difference. Also, like you mentioned, a simpler coffin, wood and zinc, and the Pope himself has said that he wants the funeral rites themselves to be less elaborate. We'll see that, of course, on Saturday when the funeral is.
And when they get near to him, what will they see? We know that his hands are crossed, holding a rosary. He has the vestments in red, the colour of the blood of Christ, and the bishop's mitre as well.
I mean, interestingly, I think the thing they'll be able to see, because he is at floor level, they'll be able to see his face, which you probably wouldn't have been able to do if, you know, he had been on an elevated platform. So like you mentioned, he is wearing the red liturgical vestments. Now, red, the color to symbolize the passion of Christ, the blood of Christ. Priests wear red on very rare occasion, Good Friday being one of them, so he's wearing that now. The white mitre, which actually symbolizes his role as the Bishop of Rome. So remember that's another reason why he's so loved in Rome. You know, the Vatican state is a separate state. It's not part of Italy, but he is very much the Bishop of of Rome, and so Romans relate to him, and his rosary is placed in his hands. And interestingly, if you look at his hands, he is wearing a ring. Now, it's not the ring of the fisherman, which he had as Pope, that gets destroyed, the second the Pope is dead. It's a ring that he wore from his time in Buenos Aires, so when he was Archbishop there. So that is what he will be wearing, and I think people will catch a last glimpse of the Pope, which I think will be probably quite upsetting for many, but exactly why they are queuing for so long. I think he was always a very physical Pope in a sense. He always realized the importance of being there, and I think that's why we saw him make what must have been a huge sacrifice on Easter Sunday, literally the day before he died, but still he made sure that he was at the balcony of St. Peter's, that he did drive around the square, and so his physicality very much tried to embody the Catholic Church, and so I think just seeing his body there will mean a lot to the people queuing.
And the translation or the transition that we saw today, just one part of the ceremony. Clearly, the main event will be on Saturday with the funeral. We know that dignitaries, presidents, heads of state are flying in from right around the world. But this is a 2,000-year-old church. He is the 266th Pope. This is well rehearsed for those who are organising this.
It is, but this year will have a little bit of a twist because, as we've been mentioning, he will be buried at another church about 20 minutes away, Santa Maria Maggiore. Now, it's not the first time that a pope is buried there. There's 7 other popes buried there, but it does throw up some logistical difficulties. So on Saturday, after the funeral, the body, the coffin, will have to be moved from here about 20 minutes away to this other church. So obviously, traffic will be stopped. There'll be road closures, but it will turn into some kind of procession. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops and how many people turn out for that. It is going to be a security, the logistics will be slightly different. But yes, it is very well rehearsed, and we are expecting the dignitaries to arrive. The public showing of the body stops at 7 p.m. on Friday, and that's also when we know that Donald Trump, for example, is arriving on Friday.
And certainly the viewing for the public will conclude at 7 p.m. local time on Friday to allow preparations for that funeral to be underway. The doors of the great St. Peter's Basilica opening at 10 o'clock. That is UK time. It'll then be open until midnight tonight or 11 p.m. in the UK, and again opening at 7 a.m. in the morning to allow as many people as possible to enter St. Peter's and pay their respects to Pope Francis.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.